and then came the torrent. Nearly all of the people I reached out to are busy beyond belief, and I expected I would get short, rushed responses from a few of them at best. What I got back instead were some of the most thoughtful answers I'd ever received, whether on paper, in person, or otherwise. In the end, there were more than 100 respondents. Granted, the so-called easy path took thousands of back and forth emails and Twitter direct messages, hundreds of phone calls, many marathons at a treadmill desk, and more than a few bottles of wine during late night writing sessions, but it worked. Did it always work? No, I didn't get the Dalai Lama this time, and at least half the people on my list didn't respond or decline the invitation, but it worked enough to matter, and that is what matters. In cases where the outreach worked, the questions did all the heavy lifting. 8 of the questions were fine-tuned, rapid-fire questions from my podcast, The Tim Ferriss Show, the first business interview podcast to pass 100 million downloads, now at around 400 to 500 million downloads. These questions have been refined over more than 400 interviews with guests such as actor-musician Jamie Foxx, General Stanley McChrystal, and writer Maria Popova. I knew that these questions worked, that interviewees generally liked them, and that they could help me in my own life. The remaining 3 questions were new additions that I hoped would solve some of my most chronic problems. Before taking them into the wild, I tested, vetted, and wordsmithed them with friends who are world-class performers in their own right. The older I get, the more time I spend, as a percentage of each day, on crafting better questions. In my experience, going from 1x to 10x, from 10x to 100x, and from 100x to, when Lady Luck really smiles, 1000x returns in various areas has been a product of better questions. John Dewey's dictum that a problem well put is half solved applies. Life punishes the vague wish and rewards the specific ask. After all, conscious thinking is largely asking and answering questions in your own head. If you want confusion and heartache, ask vague questions. If you want uncommon clarity and results, ask uncommonly clear questions. Fortunately, this is a skill you can develop. No book can give you all of the answers, but this book can train you to ask better questions. Milan Kundera, author of The Unbearable Lightness of Being, has said that the stupidity of people comes from having an answer for everything. The wisdom of the novel comes from having a question for everything. Substitute master learner for novel, and you have my philosophy of life. Often, all that stands between you and what you want is a better set of questions. Now I'll list the 11 questions I chose for this book. It's important to listen to the full questions and explanations as I shorten them throughout the rest of the book. Special thanks to Brian Koppelman, Amelia Boone, Chase Jarvis, Naval Ravikant, and others for their hugely helpful feedback. First, let us take a quick pass of the 11 questions. Some of them might seem trite or useless at first glance, but lo, things are not always what they appear. Number 1. What is the book or books you've given most as a gift and why? Or what are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life? Number 2. What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life in the last 6 months or in recent memory? My readers love specifics like brand and model, where you found it, etc. Number 3. How has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure of yours? Number 4. If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, metaphorically speaking, getting a message out to millions or billions of people, what would it say and why? It could be a few words or a paragraph. If helpful, it can be someone else's quote. Are there any quotes you think of often or live your life by? Number 5. What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made? Could be an investment of money, time, energy, etc. Number 6. What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love? Number 7. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life? Number 8. What advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the so-called real world? What advice should they ignore? Number 9. What are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise? Number 10. In the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to? distractions, invitations, etc. What new realizations and/or approaches helped? Any other tips? Number 11. When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, or have lost your focus temporarily, what do you do? If helpful, what questions do you ask yourself? Now let's take a look at each of these questions and I'll explain why they appear to work. You might ask, why should I care? I'm not an interviewer. To that, my response is simple. If you want to build or foster a world-class network, you need to interact in a way that earns it. All of these points will help. For instance, I spent weeks testing the order of questions for optimal responses. To me, proper sequencing is the secret sauce, whether you're trying to learn a new language in 8 to 12 weeks, overcome a lifelong fear of swimming, as I did, or pick the brain of a potential mentor over coffee. Good questions in the wrong order get bad responses. Conversely, you can punch well above your weight class by thinking about sequencing, as most people don't. For example, the billboard question is one of my podcast listener and guest favorites, but it's heavy. It stumps or intimidates a lot of people. I didn't want to scare busy people off who might opt out with a quick, "Sorry, Tim, I just don't have bandwidth for this right now." So, what to do? Easy. Let them warm up with lightweight questions. For example, most gifted books, purchase of under $100, which are less abstract and more concrete. In the following descriptions, my explanations get shorter towards the end of the 11 questions, as many of the points carry over or apply to all of them. Number 1. What is the book or books you've given most as a gift and why? Or what are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life? What's your favorite book? Seems like a good question. So innocent, so simple. In practice, it's terrible. The people I interview have read hundreds or thousands of books, so it's a labor-intensive question for them, and they rightly worry about picking a favorite, which then gets quoted and put in articles, Wikipedia, etc. Most gifted is lower risk, an easier search query, in other words, easier to recall, and implies benefits for a broader spectrum of people, which the idiosyncratic favorite does not. For the curious and impatient among you, here are a few books of many that came up a lot in this book. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl, The Rational Optimist by Matt Ridley, The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker, Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, Poor Charlie's Almanac by Charlie Munger. If you'd like to see all of the recommended books in one place, including a list of the top 20 most recommended from this book and Tools of Titans, my previous book, you can find all the goodies at tim.blog/booklist. Number 2. What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life in the last 6 months or in recent memory? My fans love specifics like brand and model, where you found it, etc. This might seem like a throwaway, but it isn't. It provides an easy entry point for busy interviewees while providing readers with something immediately actionable. The deeper questions elicit more profound answers, but profundity is the fiber of knowledge. It requires intensive digestion. To keep marching forward in the meanwhile, humans, yours truly included, need short-term rewards. In this book, I accomplished that with questions that provide tangible, easy, and often fun answers. Scooby snacks for your hardworking soul, if you want to think of it that way. To get the heavier lifting done, these breathers are important. Number 3. How has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure of yours? This one is particularly important to me. As I wrote in Tools of Titans, the superheroes you have in your mind, idols, icons, elite athletes, billionaires, etc., are nearly all walking flaws who've maximized 1 or 2 strengths. Humans are imperfect creatures. You don't succeed because you have no weaknesses. You succeed because you find your unique strengths and focus on developing habits around them. Everyone is fighting a battle and has fought battles you know nothing about. The heroes in this book are no different. Everyone struggles. Number 4. If you could have one gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, metaphorically speaking, getting a message out to millions or billions of people, what would it say and why? It could be a few words or a paragraph. If helpful, it can be someone else's quote. Are there any quotes you think of often or live your life by? This one's pretty self-explanatory, so I'll skip the commentary. For would-be interviewers, though, the if helpful portion is often critical for getting good answers. Number 5. What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made? Could be an investment of money, time, energy, etc. This is also self-explanatory, or so it seems. With questions like this and the next, I found it productive to give interviewees a real-world answer, an example. In a live interview, it buys them time to think, and in text, say an email, it gives them a template. For this question, for instance, I gave everyone the following. Sample answer from Amelia Boone, one of the world's top endurance athletes, sponsored by big brands, and 4-time world champion in obstacle course racing, OCR. In 2011, I shelled out $450 to participate in the first World's Toughest Mudder, a brand new 24-hour obstacle race. Saddled with law school debt, it was a big expenditure for me, and I had no business thinking I could even complete the race, let alone compete in it. But I ended up being one of 11 finishers out of 1,000 participants of that race, and it altered the course of my life, leading to my career in obstacle racing and multiple world championships. Had I not plunked down the cash for that entry fee, none of that would have happened. Number 6. What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love? I was first asked this when interviewed by my friend Chris Young, scientist, co-author of Modernist Cuisine, and CEO of Chef Steps. Search Joule Sous Vide for more on that. Before responding, and while sitting on stage at the town hall in Seattle, I said, "Ooh, that's a good question. I'm going to steal that." So I did. This question has deeper implications than you might expect. Answers prove a number of helpful things. Number 1, everyone is crazy, so you're not alone. Number 2, if you want more OCD-like behaviors, my interviewees are happy to help. And 3, corollary to number 1, so-called normal people are just crazy people you don't know well enough. If you think you're uniquely neurotic, I hate to deliver the news, but every human is Woody Allen in some part of their life. Here's the sample answer I gave for this question, taken from a live interview and slightly edited for length. Sample answer from Cheryl Strayed, best-selling author of Wild. Here's my whole theory of the sandwich. Every bite should be as much like the previous bite as possible. Do you follow? If there's a clump of tomatoes here, but then there's hummus, everything has to be as uniform as possible. So any sandwich I'm ever given, I open it up and I immediately completely rearrange the sandwich. Number 7. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life? This is short, effective, and not particularly nuanced. It had particular application to my midlife reassessment. And quite frankly, I'm surprised I don't hear questions like this more often. Number 8. What advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? What advice should they ignore? The second ignore sub-question is essential. We're prone to asking, what should I do? But less prone to asking, what shouldn't I do? Since what we don't do determines what we can do, I like asking about not to-do lists. Number 9. What are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise? This is a close cousin of the previous question. Many problems of focusing are best solved by defining what to ignore. Number 10. In the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to? Distractions, invitations, etc. What new realizations and/or approaches have helped? Any other tips? Saying yes is easy. Saying no is hard. I wanted help with the latter, as did many of the people in this book, and some answers really delivered the goods. Number 11. When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused or have lost your focus temporarily, what do you do? If helpful, what questions do you ask yourself? If your mind is beach balling, that's a nerdy Mac reference to when a computer freezes, nothing else matters much until that is resolved. Once again, the secondary if helpful question is often critical. Since any greatness in this book is from other people, I feel very comfortable saying that no matter where you are in life, you will love some of what is here. In the same breath, no matter how much I cry and pout, you will find some of what's inside boring, useless, or seemingly stupid. Out of roughly 140 profiles, I expect you to like 70, love 35, and have your life changed by perhaps 17. Amusingly, the 70 you dislike will be precisely the 70 someone else needs. Life would be boring if we all followed exactly the same rules, and you will want to pick and choose. The more surprising part of all of this is Tribe of Mentors changes with you. As time passes and life unfolds, things you initially swatted away like a distraction can reveal depth and become unimaginably important. That cliche you ignored like a throwaway fortune cookie, suddenly it makes sense and moves mountains. Conversely, things you initially found enlightening might have run their course, like a wonderful high school coach who needs to hand you off to a college coach for you to reach the next level. There's no expiration date on the advice in this book, as there's no uniformity. In the following hours, you'll hear advice from 30-something Wunderkinds and seasoned veterans in their 60s and 70s. The hope is that each time you listen to this book, not unlike with the I Ching or Tao Te Ching, something new will grab you, shake your perception of reality, illuminate your follies, confirm your intuitions, or correct your course that all-important 1 degree. The entire spectrum of human emotion and experience can be found in this book, from hilarious to heart-wrenching, from failure to success, and from life to death. May you welcome it all. On my coffee table at home, I have a piece of driftwood. Its sole purpose is to display a quote by Anais Nin, which I see every day. Life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. It's a short reminder that success can usually be measured by the number of uncomfortable conversations we are willing to have, and by the number of uncomfortable actions we are willing to take. The most fulfilled and effective people I know, world-famous creatives, billionaires, thought leaders, so on and so forth, look at their life's journey as perhaps 25% finding themselves and 75% creating themselves. This book is not intended to be a passive experience. It's intended to be a call to action. You are the author of your own life, and it's never too late to replace the stories you tell yourself and the world. It's never too late to begin a new chapter, add a surprise twist, or change genres entirely. What would it look like if it were easy? Here's to picking up the pen with a smile. Big things are coming. Some housekeeping notes that might help. Quotes I'm pondering are spread throughout this book. These are quotes that have changed my thinking and behavior in the past handful of years. After publishing Tools of Titans, I had the most productive year of my life up to that point, and my selection of books played a very large role. The quotes I'm pondering, usually from the aforementioned books, were shared on a weekly basis with subscribers of my 5-Bullet Friday newsletter, which you can find at tim.blog/Friday. A free newsletter in which I share the 5 coolest or most useful things, books, articles, gadgets, foods, supplements, apps, quotes, and so on, I've discovered that week. I hope you find them as thought-provoking as I did. Remember those rejection letters I mentioned receiving for this book? Some of the polite declines were so good that I included them. There are 3 how to say no interludes that feature actual emails I received. We shortened nearly every profile and subjectively selected the best answers. Best answers sometimes meant eliminating repetition or focusing on answers detailed enough to be both actionable and non-obvious. In my outreach to guests, I always asked the same questions in the same order, but in the profiles, I frequently reordered the answers for optimal flow, readability, and impact. I've also included some non-responses, for example, I'm terrible at saying no, to make you feel better about having the same challenges. No one is perfect, and we're all works in progress.
Endings don't have to be failures, especially when you choose to end a project or shut down a business. Even the best gigs don't last forever, nor should they.
Samin Nosrat. Instagram, @ChowSamin. Facebook, /Samin.Nosrat. saltfatacidheat.com. Samin Nosrat is a writer, teacher, and chef. Called a go-to resource for matching the correct techniques with the best ingredients by the New York Times, and the next Julia Child by NPR's All Things Considered. She's been cooking professionally since 2000, when she first stumbled into the kitchen at Chez Panisse. Samin is one of 5 food columnists for the New York Times Magazine. She lives, cooks, surfs, and gardens in Berkeley, California. She is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat: Mastering the Elements of Good Cooking.
What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life in the last 6 months or in recent memory?
Paul Stamets, Host Defense My Community Mushroom Complex, is the most incredible immunity supplement I have ever taken, and I have taken a lot of them. No matter how much I travel, how many hands I shake, or how exhausted I am, I don't get sick as long as I take the supplement diligently.
How has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure of yours?
I have had so many spectacular failures, but looking back, I can see how each of them led me a little closer to doing what I actually wanted to do. Years before I was ready to write a book of my own, I bungled 2 opportunities to co-write cookbooks with other people. These mistakes haunted me, and I was sure I'd never get to write another book. But I waited, and I persisted, and after 17 years, I wrote the book I'd always dreamt of. In 2002, I was a finalist for a Fulbright grant, but didn't receive it and felt like I'd never get to study traditional food-making methods in Italy. Instead, I found my way back to Italy and cooked and worked there for a year and a half. And now, 15 years later, I'm working on a documentary that will take me there to study traditional food-making methods. I worked at and eventually ran a restaurant that was failing financially for its entire 5-year existence. It was grueling, especially because I cared about it as if it were my own. I knew chances of our success were slim about 3 years in, and I was ready to leave then. But the owner, who was also my mentor, just wasn't ready to give up. So we dragged things out for 2 long years beyond that, and it was really challenging. Unbearable at times, even. By the time things were done, I was exhausted and depressed and just really, really unhappy. We all were, but it didn't have to be that way. That experience taught me to take agency in my own professional narratives, and that endings don't have to be failures, especially when you choose to end a project or shut down a business. Shortly after the restaurant closed, I started a food market as a small side project, and it ended up being wildly successful. I had more press and customers than I could handle. I had investors clamoring to get in on the action. But all I wanted to do was write. I didn't want to run a food market. And since my name was all over it, I didn't want to hand it off to anyone else either. So I chose to close the market on my own terms, and I made sure that everyone knew it. It was such a positive contrast to the harsh experience of closing the restaurant. I've learned to envision the ideal end to any project before I begin it now. Even the best gigs don't last forever, nor should they. On a much, much smaller scale, while cooking, I have ruined more dishes than I can recall. But the wonderful thing about cooking is that it's a pretty quick process, really, and it doesn't allow for much time to get attached to the results. So whether a dish stinks or turns out beautifully, you have to start over from scratch again the next day. You don't get a chance to sit around and wallow or toot your own horn. The important thing is to learn from each failure and try not to repeat it.
What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made?
10 years ago, while running a restaurant, I made the time to audit a class at the Graduate School of Journalism at UC Berkeley with Michael Pollan. It seemed crazy at the time to leave the restaurant for 3 hours once a week to go sit in a classroom, to get home after 15-hour days and read the books and articles on the syllabus. But some little voice inside me told me I had to find a way to do it, and I am so glad that I did. That class changed my life. It brought me into an incredible community of writers, journalists, and documentarians who have inspired and supported me along this crazy path. I got to know Michael, who encouraged me to write. He also hired me to teach him how to cook. And over the course of those lessons, he encouraged me to formalize my unique cooking philosophy into a proper curriculum. Go out into the world and teach it, and turn it into a book. That became Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, which is now a New York Times bestseller and is on its way to becoming a documentary series. Total insanity.
What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love?
American cheese. I don't eat it often, but I find the way it melts on a burger to be entirely irresistible.
In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
I have to be on a lot of the time, whether to be able to think and write clearly or to be out in the world teaching and talking about cooking. Both parts of my job require extraordinary amounts of energy. Over the last 5 years, I've started to become more attuned to the various ways I need to take care of myself. And at the top of that list is sleep. I need 8 to 9 hours of sleep to function properly, and I've started guarding my sleep time mercilessly. I spend a lot more quiet nights at home, and when I do go out to dinner, I'll insist on an early bird reservation or cut out early. I've even been known to go to bed while my guests are still partying. They're happy. I'm happy. It's all good. My obsession with sleep has improved my life immeasurably.
What advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world?
When in doubt, let kindness and compassion guide you. And don't be afraid to fail.
In the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to?
Truth be told, I'm still working on getting better at saying no. But I will say this. The more clear I am about what my goals are, the more easily I can say no. I have a notebook into which I've recorded all sorts of goals, both big and small, over the last 10 or so years. When I take the time to articulate what it is that I hope to achieve, it's simple to refer to the list and see whether saying yes to an opportunity will take me toward or away from achieving that goal. It's when I'm fuzzy about where I'm headed that I start to say yes to things willy-nilly. And I've been burned enough times by FOMO-based and ego-based decision-making to know that I'll always regret choosing to do something for the wrong reason.
When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do?
I try to get out of my head and into my body. On writing days, this usually amounts to getting up and going for a walk around downtown Oakland. Sometimes I throw in the towel completely and go for a swim. Other times, I decide to go to the farmer's market to look at, touch, smell, and taste the produce and let my senses guide me in the decision of what to cook for dinner. When I'm cooking or doing other physical work and I get overwhelmed, it's usually because I'm not taking care of myself. So, I'll take a break. I'll make a snack or a cup of tea, or I'll just drink a glass of water and sit down outside for a few minutes. It's usually enough to get me calm and clear. But the thing that will always get me unstuck is jumping into the ocean. It's been that way ever since I was a kid. I've always loved the ocean, and now, whenever I can, I'll go to the beach to swim or surf or just float. Nothing else resets me like the ocean.
The disease of our times is that we live on the surface. We're like the Platte River, a mile wide and an inch deep. Stephen Pressfield, Twitter, @SPressfield, StephenPressfield.com. Stephen Pressfield has made a professional life in 5 different writing arenas: advertising, screenwriting, fiction, narrative nonfiction, and self-help. He is the best-selling author of The Legend of Bagger Vance, Gates of Fire, The Afghan Campaign, and The Lion's Gate, as well as the cult classics on creativity, The War of Art, Turning Pro, and Do the Work. His Wednesday column on StephenPressfield.com is one of the most popular series about writing on the web.
What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love? This'll sound crazy, but I have certain places that I go to, usually alone, that summon up for me earlier eras in my life. Time is a weird thing. Sometimes you can appreciate a moment that's gone more in the present than you did when it was actually happening. The places that I go to are different all the time, and they are usually mundane, ridiculously mundane. A gas station, a bench on a street. Sometimes I'll fly across the country just to go to one of these spots. Sometimes it's on a vacation or a business trip when I'm with family or other people. I might not ever tell them. Or I might. Sometimes I'll take somebody along, though it usually doesn't work. How could it? What advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? What advice should they ignore? I'm probably hopelessly out of date, but my advice is get real-world experience. Be a cowboy, drive a truck, join the Marine Corps. Get out of the hyper-competitive life hack frame of mind. I'm 74. Believe me, you've got all the time in the world. You've got 10 lifetimes ahead of you. Don't worry about your friends beating you or getting somewhere ahead of you. Get out into the real dirt world and start failing. Why do I say that? Because the goal is to connect with your own self, your own soul. Adversity. Everybody spends their life trying to avoid it. Me too. But the best things that ever happened to me came during the times when the shit hit the fan and I had nothing and nobody to help me. Who are you really? What do you really want? Get out there and fail and find out. What is the book or books you've given most as a gift, and why? Or what are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life? The single book that has influenced me most is probably the last book in the world that anybody is going to want to read. Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War. This book is dense, difficult, long, full of blood and guts. It wasn't written, as Thucydides himself attests at the start, to be easy or fun, but it is loaded with hardcore, timeless truths, and the story it tells ought to be required reading for every citizen in a democracy. Thucydides was an Athenian general who was beaten and disgraced in a battle early in the 27-year conflagration that came to be called the Peloponnesian War. He decided to drop out of the fighting and dedicate himself to recording, in all the detail he could manage, this conflict, which, he felt certain, would turn out to be the greatest and most significant war ever fought up to that time. He did just that. Have you heard of Pericles' funeral oration? Thucydides was there for it. He transcribed it. He was there for the debates in the Athenian assembly over the treatment of the island of Melos, the famous Melian dialogue. If he wasn't there for the defeat of the Athenian fleet at Syracuse or the betrayal of Athens by Alcibiades, he knew people who were there, and he went to extremes to record what they told him. Thucydides, like all the Greeks of his era, was unencumbered by Christian theology or Marxist dogma or Freudian psychology or any of the other isms that attempt to convince us that man is basically good or perhaps perfectible. He saw things as they were, in my opinion. It's a dark vision, but tremendously bracing and empowering because it's true. On the island of Corcyra, a great naval power in its day, one faction of citizens trapped their neighbors and fellow Corcyrians in a temple. They slaughtered the prisoners' children outside before their eyes, and when the captives gave themselves up, based on pledges of clemency and oaths sworn before the gods, the captors massacred them as well. This was not a war of nation versus nation. This was brother against brother in the most civilized cities on earth. To read Thucydides is to see our own world in microcosm. It's the study of how democracies destroy themselves by breaking down into warring factions, the few versus the many. Hoi polloi in Greek means the many. Oligoi means the few. I can't recommend Thucydides for fun, but if you want to expose yourself to a towering intellect, writing on the deepest stuff imaginable, give it a try. What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life in the last 6 months or in recent memory? This cost a lot more than $100, but I bought an electric car, a Kia Soul, and got some solar panels for my roof. Driving on sun power is a major giggle, trust me. How has a failure, or apparent failure, set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure of yours? I just wrote a book called The Knowledge about my favorite failure, and guess what? I've been trying to get published for about 15 years at that point. I decided to give up and move to Hollywood to see if I could find work writing for the movies. Don't ask me what movies I wrote. I will never tell. And if you find out by other means, be warned. Don't see 'em. But working in the industry made me a pro and paved the way for whatever successes finally did come. If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why? I would not have a billboard, and I would take down every billboard that everybody else has put up. What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made? I've never invested in the stock market or taken a risk on anything outside myself. I decided a long time ago that I would only bet on myself. I will risk 2 years on a book that'll probably fall flat on its face. I don't mind. I tried. It didn't work. I believe in investing in your heart. That's all I do, really. I'm a servant of the muse. All my money is on her. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life? I've always been a gym person and an early morning person, but a few years ago, I got invited to train with T.R. Goodman at a place called Pro Camp. There's a system, yeah, but basically what we do, and it's definitely a group thing with 3 or 4 of us training together, is just work hard. I hate it, but it's great. TR says as we're leaving after working out, nothing you face today will be harder than what you just did. In the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to? What new realizations and/or approaches helped? I got a chance a couple of years ago to visit a security firm, one of those places that guard celebrities and protect their privacy. In other words, a business whose total job was to say no. The person who was giving me the tour told me that the business screens every incoming letter, solicitation, email, etc., and decides which ones get through to the client. How many get through? I asked. Virtually none, my friend said. I decided that I would look at incoming mail the same way that firm does. If I were the security professional tasked with protecting me from bogus, sociopathic, and clueless asks, which ones would I screen and dump into the trash? That has helped a lot. When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do? I have a friend at the gym who knew Jack LaLanne. Google him if the name is unfamiliar. Jack used to say it's okay to take a day off from working out, but on that day you're not allowed to eat. That's the short way of saying you're not really allowed to get unfocused. Take a vacation, gather yourself, but know that the only reason you're here on this planet is to follow your star and do what the muse tells you. It's amazing how a good day's work will get you right back to feeling like yourself. What are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise? Great question. In the world of writing, everyone wants to succeed immediately and without pain or effort. Really? Or they love to write books about how to write books rather than actually writing. A book that might actually be about something. Bad advice is everywhere. Build a following, establish a platform, learn how to scam the system. In other words, do all the surface stuff and none of the real work it takes to actually produce something of value. The disease of our times is that we live on the surface. We're like the Platte River, a mile wide and an inch deep. I always say, if you want to become a billionaire, invent something that will allow people to indulge their own resistance. Somebody did invent it. It's called the internet, social media. That wonderland where we can flit from one superficial jerk-off distraction to another, always remaining on the surface, never going deeper than an inch. Real work and real satisfaction come from the opposite of what the web provides. They come from going deep into something. The book you're writing, the album, the movie, and staying there for a long, long time.
It all happened so suddenly and cinematically that it might defy belief. I remembered that actually I had always wanted to be a writer. So I started writing that very evening.
Susan Cain. Twitter, @Susan Cain. Facebook, /author Susan Cain. QuietRev.com. Susan Cain is the co-founder of Quiet Revolution and the author of the bestsellers Quiet Power: The Secret Strengths of Introverted Kids, and Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking, which has been translated into 40 languages and been on the New York Times bestseller list for more than 4 years. Quiet has been named the best book of the year by Fast Company magazine, which also named Susan one of its most creative people in business. Susan is the co-founder of the Quiet Schools Network and the Quiet Leadership Institute, and her writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Wall Street Journal, and other publications. Her TED Talk has been viewed more than 17 million times and was named by Bill Gates as one of his all-time favorite talks.
How has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure of yours?
Many, many moons ago, I used to be a corporate lawyer. I was an ambivalent corporate lawyer at best, and anyone could have told you that I was in the wrong profession, but still, I dedicated tons of time, 3 years of law school, 1 year of clerking for a federal judge, and 6.5 years at a Wall Street firm, to be exact, and had lots of deep and treasured relationships with fellow attorneys. But the day came when I was well along on partnership track that the senior partner in my firm came to my office and told me that I wouldn't be put up for partner on schedule. To this day, I don't know whether he meant that I would never be put up for partner or just delayed for a good long while. All I know is that I embarrassingly burst into tears right in front of him, and then asked for a leave of absence. I left work that very afternoon and bicycled round and round Central Park in New York City, having no idea what to do next. I thought I'd travel. I thought I'd stare at the walls for a while. Instead, and it all happened so suddenly and cinematically that it might defy belief, I remembered that actually I had always wanted to be a writer. So I started writing that very evening. The next day I signed up for a class at NYU in creative nonfiction writing, and the next week I attended the first session of class and knew that I was finally home. I had no expectation of ever making a living through writing, but it was crystal clear to me that from then on, writing would be my center, and that I would look for freelance work that would give me lots of free time to pursue it. If I had succeeded at making partner right on schedule, I might still be miserably negotiating corporate transactions 16 hours a day. It's not that I'd never thought about what else I might like to do other than law, but until I had the time and space to think about life outside the hermetic culture of a law practice, I couldn't figure out what I really wanted to do.
What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made?
7 years of time to write Quiet. I didn't care how long it took, and though I wanted the book to succeed, I felt good about the investment of time regardless of the outcome, because I felt so certain that writing in general, and writing that book in particular, was the right thing to do. I handed in a first draft after the first 2 years, which my editor, correctly, pronounced crappy. She put it only slightly more delicately. She said, "Take all the time you need, start from scratch, and get it right." I left her office elated because I agreed with her. I knew that I needed years to get it right. After all, I'd never published a thing before Quiet, so I was learning how to write a book from scratch, and I was thrilled that she was giving me the time. Most publishing houses rush books to market long before they're fully baked. If she'd done that, there would be no Quiet revolution.
What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love?
I love sad minor key music. I find it elevating and transcendent, and not really sad at all. I think that's because this kind of music is really about the fragility and therefore the preciousness of life and love. Leonard Cohen is my patron saint. Try Dance Me to the End of Love or Famous Blue Raincoat, or pretty much anything else he's ever written, including, of course, Hallelujah, his best-known song, but really only the tip of the Leonard iceberg. Also, Hinak Yafa, You Are Beautiful, by Idan Rachel. It's a gorgeous song of longing for the beloved, but really, it's about longing in general. My favorite word in any language is saudade, the Portuguese word that's at the heart of Brazilian and Portuguese culture and music. It means, roughly, a sweet longing for a beloved thing or person that will likely never return. Try the music of Madre Deus or Cesaria Evora. My next book is sort of on this topic.
What advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? What advice should they ignore?
You will hear so many stories of people who risked everything in order to achieve this or that goal, especially creative goals. But I do not believe that your best creative work is done when you're stressed out because you're teetering on the edge of bankruptcy or other personal disasters. Just the opposite. You should set up your life so that it is as comfortable and happy as possible, and so that it accommodates your creative work. I often ask myself whether all those years of Wall Street law were a waste, given that what I was really meant to do the whole time was to explore human psychology and to tell the truth in writing about what it's like to be alive. And the answer is no. It wasn't a waste, for many reasons. First, because I learned so much about the so-called real world that would have otherwise remained a permanent mystery. Second, because a front row seat at a Wall Street negotiation is as good a place as any to study the occasional ridiculousness of humans. But finally, because it gave me a financial cushion, when I was ready to try a creative life. It wasn't a huge cushion, as I hadn't saved that much, but it made a huge difference. Even once I started my writing life, I spent tons of time setting up a modest freelance business, teaching people negotiation skills that I could use to support myself for as long as it took. I told myself that my writing goal was to get something published by the time I was 75 years old. I wanted writing to be a permanent source of pleasure and never be associated with financial stress or, more generally, the pressure to achieve. Of course, I'm not saying that the smart, driven college student in your question should spend 10 years in finance before striking out creatively. But they should be planning on how they're going to make ends meet. That way, the time that they do spend with their creative projects, whether it's 30 minutes or 10 hours a day, can be all about focus, flow, and occasional glimpses of joy.
When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do?
I love espresso and would happily consume it all day. But I only allow myself one latte a day and save it for when I'm doing my creative work. Partly because it jumpstarts my mind almost magically, and partly because this has trained me, Pavlovian style, to associate writing with the pleasure of coffee.
Thinking of what makes me happy doesn't give me the same clarity as thinking about what gives me bliss. Kyle Maynard. Instagram, @KyleMaynard. Facebook, /KyleMaynard.fanpage, kyle-maynard.com. Kyle Maynard is a best-selling author, entrepreneur, and ESPY award-winning mixed martial arts athlete, known for becoming the first quadruple amputee to reach the summits of Mount Kilimanjaro and Mount Aconcagua without the aid of prosthetics. Oprah Winfrey called Kyle one of the most inspiring young men you will ever hear about. Arnold Schwarzenegger described him as a champion human, and even Wayne Gretzky has spoken of Kyle's greatness. Kyle was born with a rare condition that resulted in arms that end at the elbows and legs that end near his knees. Despite this, and with the support of his family, Kyle learned as a child to live life independently without prosthetics. Kyle has become a champion wrestler, inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, CrossFit certified instructor, owner of the No Excuses Gym, world record-setting weightlifter, and skilled mountaineer.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift, and why? Or, what are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life? Dune by Frank Herbert, The Stranger by Albert Camus, The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. How has a failure, or apparent failure, set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure of yours? It's almost more difficult to think of a time when an apparent failure didn't set me up for later success. Failure is inextricably connected to any major success I've ever had. My favorite failure was my earliest. My grandma Betty had this dark green jar she used to ask me to get sugar out of, except the catch was, as an amputee, I used both arms to grip things, and I could only fit one arm inside the jar. I'd sit there for hours, repeatedly failing to balance the scoop on my one arm. I'd get it right to the edge, then lose it. After 50 more tries, I'd get it back near the top before I'd lose it again. Eventually, and sometimes to my surprise, I'd succeed. It not only helped with my dexterity and focus, but it also helped build my will. The best way I can describe the feeling is a Finnish word, sisu. The mental strength to continue to try even after you feel you've reached the limits of your abilities. I don't think failure is sometimes part of the process. It always is. When you feel you can't go on, know that you're just getting started. If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why? Are there any quotes you think of often or live your life by? The quote I'd put on that billboard belongs to my friend and former Navy SEAL Richard Makowitz. Not dead, can't quit. A few people said it was borderline child abuse that my parents had me continue wrestling after I lost my first 35 matches. Less than a decade later, those same people were saying I was unfairly advantaged. My sisters cried after reading comments about how it would take 20 seconds for me to become the first televised death in MMA. Spoiler alert, didn't die. Some said I'd get my team killed on Mount Kilimanjaro and Mount Aconcagua. I'm willing to bet most of those critics haven't stood on top of those mountains like my friends and I have. It's for this reason that I love that quote. It's my mantra during the toughest moments. Richard lost a battle with cancer this year, but he experienced more in this life than most men could in 10, and he lived this quote until his last breath. What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love? I think suffering is probably the most absurd thing that I love. Suffering is the greatest teacher I've ever had. Feeling different than other kids because I was born without arms and legs, being pancaked by bigger kids in football, having my nose broken through the states and nationals in wrestling, feeling freezing cold and physically broken on the side of a mountain, being nervous and wondering if I could make payroll at my gym. They weren't always fun at the time, but they're some of my favorite moments. And I love people who love suffering. It took 3 times for my best friend Jeff Gum to make it through BUDS, going through Hell Week, with viral gastroenteritis and rhabdomyolysis. The day he finished 10 years as a Navy SEAL, I asked him what the best moment was, and he said it was having everything go wrong and watching the instructors try everything they could to make him quit. What advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? What advice should they ignore? Since I read Joseph Campbell's line, "Follow your bliss," it has become my true north. It helps me in those moments when I'm staring off in the shower for hours looking like someone put me under hypnosis. Thinking of what makes me happy doesn't give me the same clarity as thinking about what gives me bliss. For me, it's the freedom I feel on top of a mountain or the breeze I feel laying on a catamaran net halfway around the world. Bliss is the highest peak of what brings you joy. If happiness is just above the status quo, bliss is what makes you feel most alive. Expect it will take courage to follow your bliss, and expect it will suck at times. Expect you're going to have to take risks for it. Expect others won't necessarily understand. And also expect that what gives you bliss today may not be what does tomorrow. Just follow it all over again. What are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise? The worst advice I've ever been given was to not increase the fee I charged to give a keynote speech. I was told I would price myself out of the market. I didn't have enough recent media coverage to compete against well-known speakers, blah, blah, blah. I decided to raise my price anyway. Incrementally at first, then I doubled it. Now I have twice as many inquiries and people even negotiate with me less. I wish I'd done it earlier. It's given me much more freedom. As I write this, I'm spending a week on a yacht in Croatia and the rest of the summer traveling through Europe. Time is the only thing we can't get back. Hopefully by the time you read this, I will be on my way to doubling it again. In the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to? My biggest shift came after listening to a successful CEO talk about his philosophy for hiring people. When his company grew and he ran out of time to interview people himself, he had his employees rate new candidates on a 1 to 10 scale. The only stipulation was they couldn't choose 7. It immediately dawned on me how many invitations I was receiving that I would rate as a 7. Speeches, weddings, coffees, even dates. If I thought something was a 7, there was a good chance I felt obligated to do it. But if I have to decide between a 6 or an 8, it's a lot easier to quickly determine whether or not I should even consider it.
Quotes I'm pondering. Tim Ferriss, September 18th through October 2nd, 2015. People think focus means saying yes to the thing you've got to focus on. But that's not what it means at all. It means saying no to the 100 other good ideas there are. You have to pick carefully. I'm actually as proud of the things we haven't done as the things I have done. Innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. Steve Jobs, co-founder and former CEO of Apple. What you seek is seeking you. Rumi, 13th century Persian poet and Sufi master. Anyone who lives within their means suffers from a lack of imagination. Oscar Wilde, Irish writer, author of The Picture of Dorian Gray. In order to have, you must do. And in order to do, you must be. Terry Crews. Twitter, Instagram, @TerryCrews. Facebook, /Real Terry Crews. TerryCrews.com. Terry Crews is an actor and former NFL player. Los Angeles Rams, San Diego Chargers, Washington Redskins, and Philadelphia Eagles. His wide-ranging credits include the original viral Old Spice commercials, television series such as The Newsroom, Arrested Development, and Everybody Hates Chris, and films including White Chicks, The Expendables franchise, Bridesmaids, and The Longest Yard. He now stars on the Golden Globe Award-winning Fox sitcom Brooklyn Nine-Nine. In 2014, Terry released his autobiography, Manhood: How to Be a Better Man, or Just Live with One.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift, and why? Or what are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life? The Master Key System by Charles F. Hannell. I have read hundreds of personal development books, but this is the one that clearly showed me how to visualize, contemplate, and focus on what it was I truly wanted. It revealed to me that we only get what we desire most, and to apply myself with a laser-like focus upon a goal, task, or project. That in order to have, you must do, and in order to do, you must be, and this process is immediate. Although it takes time for these desires to manifest in our material world, you must see the thing you desire as completed, finished, and real now. The better you can do this, the more you can accomplish. I have bought several copies of this book and distributed it to family and friends. I also reread it, probably once a month, to keep my vision clear. 2 more are Viktor E. Frankl's incredible Man's Search for Meaning and David McRaney's You Are Not So Smart. Both books are absolutely essential to me in order to keep my perspectives correct in a changing world. How has a failure, or apparent failure, set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure of yours? 1986. It was my senior year in high school at Flint Academy in Flint, Michigan. I was the starting center for our Class C basketball team. We had a great team that year, and we were expected to go very far, if not all the way, in the state playoffs. We faced Burton Atherton in the district final, and we were expected to trounce them, but they tried something we'd never seen before. They didn't play. They would bring the ball down the court and just pass it back and forth at the top of the key. There was no shot clock, so they did this forever. The only time we scored was when we managed to steal the ball, but our coach, for some reason, decided we were going to let them do it. I remember standing there with my hands raised in zone defense, watching them hold the ball without even attempting to shoot. I was frustrated, and every attempt I made to step out of the zone was rebuffed by our coach. This method was working for them because with only 5 seconds left on the game clock, they were up 47-45. One of their players made a mistake and tried a long pass cross court, and I stole the ball. I desperately dribbled the entire length of the court. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, for our only chance to win. I missed. Their fans go crazy as it was the biggest upset of the year, and I collapse in a heap thinking my life is over. The coach afterward told the whole team that I had no business taking that shot and I should have passed it to our star player. It was in the paper the next day that I failed, and I was ridiculed by students and teachers alike. I was beyond crushed. A dark cloud covered me everywhere I went as I internalized the loss. A few days later, as the fog of failure began to lift, I remember having a rare time alone in my room. I usually shared it with my brother. As I sat in the silence, another thought pierced through my sadness. I took the shot. It was invigorating, even exciting. Hey, when all the chips were on the line, you didn't leave your future up to others. You took your shot. Instantly, I felt free and in control. I knew from then on that I could have the courage to fail on my own terms. From that moment, I decided that if I was going to succeed or fail, it was going to be up to me. I was changed forever. If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why? God will not have his work made manifest by cowards. Ralph Waldo Emerson. I love this quote, because it is all about defeating fear. Every great and extraordinary accomplishment in this world was done through courage. Hell, you don't even get to be born unless your mother has the courage to have you. I repeat this phrase when I'm anxious or nervous about something. I ask myself, what's the worst that can happen? Usually the answer is, you can die. Then I answer back, I'd rather die doing something I feel is great and amazing rather than be safe and comfortable living a life I hate. I talk to myself a lot, and this quote helps me sort out my fears and deal with them. The more you run from your fears, the bigger they get, but the more you go into them, the more they tend to vanish like a mirage. What advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? What advice should they ignore? There is a big difference between intelligence and wisdom. Many are fooled into thinking they are the same thing, but they are not. I have seen intelligent serial killers, but I've never seen a wise one. Intelligent human beings have been given this trumped-up position in society where just because they are intelligent, they are to be listened to, and I have found this is extremely dangerous. I was in a Christian cult along with other very intelligent people, but looking back, if I had heeded wisdom, I would have seen we were all on the wrong path. Intelligence is like following a GPS route right into a body of water until you drown. Wisdom looks at the route, but when it takes a turn into the ocean, decides not to follow it, then finds a new, better way. Wisdom reigns supreme. Ignore any advice that tells you you are going to miss something. Every mistake I have ever made in business, marriage, and personal conduct was because I thought if I didn't do or get this now, you have all you need. What are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise? Work hard to beat the competition. The truth is that competition is the opposite of creativity. If I am working hard to beat the competition, it actually prevents me from thinking creatively to make all concepts of competition obsolete. As a football player, I was told to work hard to compete against the other team, some perceived future threat, new draftees, age, or injury, and even my current teammates. As an actor, you are told to look a certain way or do things you don't agree with in order to compete. This competitive mindset destroys people. It's the scorched earth way of thinking, and everyone is burned. The truth is that you need the success of everyone in your field in order to achieve your own success. Creativity operates differently. You work hard because you're inspired to, not because you have to. Work becomes fun and you have energy for days because this life is not a young man's game. It is an inspired person's game. The keys belong to whoever is inspired, and no specific age, sex, gender, or cultural background has a monopoly on inspiration. When you're creative, you render competition obsolete because there is only one you, and no one can do things exactly the way you do. Never worry about the competition. When you're creative, you can, in fact, cheer others on with the full knowledge that their success will undoubtedly be your own. In the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to? What new realizations and/or approaches helped? I realized that I had to let people leave my life, never to return. Every relationship I have in my life, from family and friends to business partners, must be a voluntary relationship. My wife can leave at any time. Family members can call me or not. Business partners can decide to move on, and it's all okay. But the same is true on my end. If I say I'm ready to move on and someone doesn't accept that, now we have a problem. I remember trying to move on from a very close friend because he was displaying behaviors I wasn't comfortable with. Soon after, I received a letter by certified mail threatening me with a lawsuit for over $1 million because of the demise of our friendship. It was ridiculous, and it still is, so I actually framed the letter as a reminder of the necessity of letting people go and moving on. One approach I use is imaginary great-grandchildren. I talk to them all the time. I ask them about decisions and relationships and whether or not to continue them. They tend to speak loud and clear. "Grandpa, you shouldn't do this," or "You need to leave these people alone because we will be affected negatively," or worse, "We won't exist." Those moments show me that this whole thing is bigger than me. It's the realization that there is a will to pleasure, a will to power, and in the words of Viktor Frankl, a will to meaning. You won't take a bullet for pleasure or power, but you will for meaning. So you sometimes have to do what I call a crowd thinner. One wrong person in your circle can destroy your whole future. It's that important.
Busy is a decision.
Debbie Millman. Twitter, Instagram, @DebbieMillman. DebbieMillman.com. Debbie Millman has been called one of the most influential designers working today by Graphic Design USA. She is the founder and host of Design Matters, the world's first and longest-running podcast about design, where she's interviewed nearly 300 design luminaries and cultural commentators, including Massimo Vignelli and Milton Glaser. Her artwork has been exhibited around the world. She's designed everything from wrapping paper to beach towels, greeting cards to playing cards, notebooks to t-shirts, and Star Wars merchandise to global Burger King rebrands. Debbie is the president emeritus of AIGA, one of only 5 women to hold the position in the organization's 100-year history. The editorial and creative director of Print Magazine, and the author of 6 books. In 2009, Debbie co-founded with Steve Heller the world's first master's program in branding at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, which has received international acclaim.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift and why? Or what are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life?
A book that has influenced my life and one that I keep going back to over and over is the anthology The Voice That Is Great Within Us, American Poetry of the 20th Century. Gorgeously, thoughtfully, and carefully edited by Hayden Carruth. It was required reading in a summer college class I attended back in the early 1980s. This funny-looking book introduced me to the most treasured, deeply felt poem, Maximus to Himself by Charles Olson, which has since become the blueprint of my life, as well as the poetry of Denise Levertov, Adrienne Rich, Ezra Pound, Wallace Stevens, and so many more. I still have my original copy, and though the cover has come off and the spine is cracked in numerous places, I will never replace it.
What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life in the last 6 months, or in recent memory?
The purchase that has influenced me over the last 6 months is the Apple Pencil. I do so much of my artwork by hand, and now there is a device that draws and feels like a real pencil that I can use electronically. It has changed the way I work.
How has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure of yours?
In early 2003, a good friend sent me an email with a subject line that read, "Begin drinking heavily before opening." The email contained a link leading to a blog titled Speak Up, the first ever online forum about graphic design and branding in the world. Suddenly, sprawled before my eyes, I found myself reading an article that disparaged my entire career. This incident, in tandem with a number of historical rejections and setbacks, sent me into a deep depression, and I seriously considered leaving the design profession altogether. However, in the 14 years since this occurred, this takedown of everything I'd done to date and everything I thought was a complete and total failure for a long time, transformed into the foundation of everything I've done since. Everything I am doing now contains seeds of origin from that time. Turns out the worst professional experience I faced became the most important defining experience of my life.
If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why?
My billboard would say this: busy is a decision. Here's why. Of the many, many excuses people use to rationalize why they can't do something, the excuse, "I am too busy," is not only the most inauthentic, it is also the laziest. I don't believe in too busy. Like I said, busy is a decision. We do the things we want to do, period. If we say we are too busy, it is shorthand for not important enough. It means you would rather be doing something else that you consider more important. That thing could be sleep, it could be sex, or it could be watching Game of Thrones. If we use busy as an excuse for not doing something, what we are really, really saying is that it's not a priority. Simply put, you don't find the time to do something. You make the time to do things. We are now living in a society that sees busy as a badge. It has become cultural cachet to use the excuse, "I am too busy," as a reason for not doing anything we don't feel like doing. The problem is this: if you let yourself off the hook for not doing something for any reason, you won't ever do it. If you want to do something, you can't let being busy stand in the way, even if you are busy. Make the time to do the things you want to do, and then do them.
What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made?
The best investment I've ever made was in psychotherapy. When I first started, I was in my early 30s, and the bills practically killed me. But I knew I needed to deeply understand all the destructive things I was doing in order to try to live a remarkable life, and I wanted this more than anything. Over the years, I still sometimes smart at the monthly invoices, but I've never doubted that this investment has profoundly shaped who I have become. Although I still think I have work to do, it changed and then saved my life in every imaginable way. I'm in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, put another way, psychoanalysis with an emphasis on self-psychology. For me, talk therapy is the only thing that I've really ever felt drawn to. Things like EMDR and behavior modification seem too voodoo for me. Some things that I think are important to consider, strictly from my perspective. Once-a-week therapy does not work well. Twice or more gives you continuity and an opportunity to germinate in a way that once a week doesn't. Also, once a week almost feels like catch-up. Therapy takes time. It takes dedication, stamina, resilience, persistence, and courage. It's not a quick fix, but it saved my life. Tell your therapist everything. If you edit who you are or pretend to be something you are not, or project who or how you want to be seen, it will take that much longer. Just be yourself. If you are afraid your therapist will judge you, tell them. All of these things are important to talk about. There is no shame in feeling shame. Almost everyone does, and therapy will help you understand it. There is nothing like understanding your motivations and insecurities to help you integrate those feelings into your psyche in the most healthy and authentic way. I would not recommend going to a therapist that one of your friends also goes to. Most good therapists abide by this rule now. Things get very blurry and boundaries get weird. Yes, it will be expensive, but what is more valuable than better understanding who you are, breaking intrinsic bad habits, getting over much of your shit, or at least understanding why you do it in the first place, and generally living a happier, more contented, more peaceful life? My advice to anyone looking for a therapist is to make sure they are trained, PhD or MD, plus postdoctoral training.
What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love?
I have been told that because I like to make up silly songs and then sing them in all sorts of absurd situations and occurrences, I am trying to turn my life into a Hollywood musical. I probably wouldn't disagree.
In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
After a Design Matters interview with the great writer Dani Shapiro, we started to talk about the role of confidence in success. She went on to state that she felt that confidence was highly overrated. I was instantly intrigued. She explained that she felt that most overly confident people were really annoying, and the most confident people were usually arrogant. She felt that over-exuding that amount of confidence was a sure sign that a person was compensating for some type of internal psychological deficit. Instead, Dani declared that courage was more important than confidence. When you are operating out of courage, you are saying that no matter how you feel about yourself or your opportunities or the outcome, you are going to take a risk and take a step toward what you want. You are not waiting for the confidence to mysteriously arrive. I now believe that confidence is achieved through repeated success at any endeavor. The more you practice doing something, the better you will get at it, and your confidence will grow over time.
What advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? What advice should they ignore?
Since I teach, I have a lot of opinions on what advice to give college students. I think one of the most important is about job hunting. Like everything else meaningful in life, it takes training to get good at job hunting. You don't just find and get a great job. You find and win a great job against a pool of very competitive candidates who may want that job as much, if not more, than you do. Finding and winning a great job is a competitive sport that requires as much career athleticism and perseverance as making it to the Olympics. You must be in the finest career shape possible in order to win. There is very little luck involved. Winning your great job is about hard work, stamina, grit, ingenuity, and timing. What might look like luck to you is simply hard work paying off. These are questions I tell my students to ask themselves as they set out on their path in the real world. Am I spending enough time on looking for, finding, and working toward winning a great job? Am I constantly refining and improving my skills? What can I continue to get better and more competitive at? Do I believe that I am working harder than everyone else? If not, what else can I be doing? What are the people who are competing with me doing that I am not doing? Am I doing everything I can every single day to stay in career shape? If not, what else should I be doing? One piece of advice I think they should ignore is the value of being a people person. No one cares if you are a people person. Have a point of view and share it meaningfully, thoughtfully, and with conviction.
What are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise?
I do not believe in work-life balance. I believe that if you view your work as a calling, it is a labor of love rather than laborious. When your work is a calling, you are not approaching the amount of hours you are working with a sense of dread or counting the minutes until the weekend. Your calling can become a life-affirming engagement that can provide its own balance and spiritual nourishment. Ironically, it takes hard work to achieve this. When you are in your 20s and 30s and want to have a remarkable, fulfilling career, you must work hard. If you don't work harder than everyone else, you will not get ahead. Further, if you are looking for work-life balance in your 20s or 30s, you are likely in the wrong career. If you are doing something you love, you don't want work-life balance.
When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do?
As a loudmouth native New Yorker, I have often regretted acting impulsively when I am feeling angry or frustrated. Now, when I feel that familiar urge to respond defensively or say things I don't really mean or bang out a wounded response via email or text, I wait. I force myself to breathe, take a step back, and wait to respond. Just an hour or two or an overnight retreat makes a world of difference. And if all else fails, I try to obey this message I got in a Chinese fortune cookie, which I have since taped to my laptop. Avoid compulsively making things worse.
Self-esteem is just the reputation that you have with yourself. You'll always know. Naval Ravikant, Twitter, @Naval, startupboy.com. Naval Ravikant is the CEO and co-founder of AngelList. He previously co-founded Vast.com and ePinions.com, which went public as part of Shopping.com. He is an active angel investor and has invested in more than 100 companies, including many unicorn mega successes. His deals include Twitter, Uber, Yammer, Postmates, Wish, Thumbtack, and OpenDNS. In recent years, he is the person I call most for startup-related advice.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift and why? Or what are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life? Total Freedom by Jiddu Krishnamurti, A Rationalist's Guide to the Perils of the Human Mind, the spiritual book that I keep returning to. Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, a history of the human species with observations, frameworks, and mental models that will have you looking at history and your fellow humans differently. Everything by Matt Ridley. Matt is a scientist, optimist, and forward thinker. Genome, The Red Queen, The Origins of Virtue, The Rational Optimist, they're all great. How has a failure, or apparent failure, set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure of yours? Suffering is a moment of clarity when you can no longer deny the truth of a situation and are forced into uncomfortable change. I'm lucky that I didn't get everything I wanted in my life, or I'd be happy with my first good job, my college sweetheart, my college town. Being poor when young led to making money when old. Losing faith in my bosses and elders made me independent and an adult. Almost getting into the wrong marriage helped me recognize and enter the right one. Falling sick made me focus on my health. It goes on and on. Inside suffering is the seed of change. If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why? Desire is a contract that you make with yourself to be unhappy until you get what you want. Desire is a driver, a motivator. In fact, a sincere and uncompromising desire placed above everything else is nearly always fulfilled. But every judgment, every preference, every setback spawns its own desire, and soon we drown in them, each one a problem to be solved, and we suffer until it's fulfilled. Happiness, or at least peace, is the sense that nothing is missing in this moment, no desires running amok. It's okay to have a desire, but pick a big one and pick it carefully. Drop the small ones. What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made? Every book I read that wasn't assigned to me or that I didn't read with a purpose in mind. The genuine love for reading itself, when cultivated, is a superpower. We live in the age of Alexandria, when every book and every piece of knowledge ever written down is a fingertip away. The means of learning are abundant. It's the desire to learn that's scarce. Cultivate that desire by reading what you want, not what you're supposed to. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life? Happiness is a choice you make and a skill you develop. The mind is just as malleable as the body. We spend so much time and effort trying to change the external world, other people, and our own bodies, all the while accepting ourselves the way we were programmed in our youths. We accept the voice that talks to us in our head all the time as the source of all truth. But all of it is malleable. Every day is new. And memory and identity are burdens from the past that prevent us from living freely in the present. What advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? What advice should they ignore? Advice. Follow your intellectual curiosity over whatever is hot right now. If your curiosity ever leads you to a place where society eventually wants to go, you'll get paid extremely well. Do everything you were going to do, but with less angst, less suffering, less emotion. Everything takes time. Ignore the news, complainers, angry people, high conflict people. Anyone trying to scare you about a danger that isn't clear and present. Don't do things that you know are morally wrong, not because someone is watching, but because you are. Self-esteem is just the reputation that you have with yourself. You'll always know. Ignore the unfairness. There is no fair. Play the hand that you're dealt to the best of your ability. People are highly consistent. So you will eventually get what you deserve, and so will they. In the end, everyone gets the same judgment. Death. What are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise? You're too young. Most of history was built by young people. They just got credit when they were older. The only way to truly learn something is by doing it. Yes, listen to guidance. But don't wait. In the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to? I say no to nearly everything. I make a lot fewer short-term compromises. I aspire to only work with people who I can work with forever, to invest my time in activities that are a joy unto themselves, and to focus on the extremely long term. So, I have no time for short-term things, dinners with people I won't see again, tedious ceremonies to please tedious people, traveling to places that I wouldn't go to on vacation. When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do? Memento mori. Remember that you have to die. All of this will go to nothing. Remember before you were born? Just like that.
Self-sufficiency is another word for poverty. Matt Ridley. Twitter, @MattWRidley. mattridley.co.uk. Matt Ridley is a prominent author whose books have sold more than 1 million copies, been translated into 31 languages, and won several awards. They include The Red Queen, The Origins of Virtue, Genome, Nature via Nurture, Francis Crick, The Rational Optimist, one of the most recommended books by others in this book, and The Evolution of Everything. His TED Talk, When Ideas Have Sex, has been viewed more than 2 million times. He writes a weekly column in The Times, London, and writes regularly for the Wall Street Journal. As Viscount Ridley, he was elected to England's House of Lords in February 2013.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift and why? Or what are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life? 2 books that have greatly influenced my life are The Double Helix by James D. Watson and The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. What fascinates me about these books is how they revolutionize the telling of scientific stories while themselves breaking new scientific ground in the elucidation of the secret of life. Read these 2 books and you will get a great answer to a question that has baffled mankind for millions of years. What is life? Watson's non-fiction novel was an astonishing literary achievement, and it was about the greatest scientific discovery of the 20th century. Dawkins's stranger-than-fiction argument turned evolutionary biology on its head and was written like a great detective story. What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life in the last 6 months or in recent memory? Sleep phones. It's a headband that goes over your eyes and ears and that has inside 2 ultra-flat earphones so you can listen to books as you fall asleep. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life? The habit of listening to books as I fall asleep. This has cured my sometimes serious insomnia without mood-altering drugs or futile and expensive psychotherapy and given me a chance to read even more books. By setting the timer carefully and rewinding a little every time I wake, I can miss almost none of a book. What advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? Don't be intimidated by anything. In the vast majority of the professions and vocations, the people who succeed are not any cleverer than you. The adult world is not full of gods, just people who have acquired skills and habits that work for them. And specialize. The great human achievement is to specialize as a producer of goods or services so that you can diversify as a consumer. Self-sufficiency is another word for poverty.
We spend far too much time complaining about the way things are and forget that we have the power to change anything and everything.
Bozema St. John. Twitter, Instagram, @BadassBose. Bozema St. John is the chief brand officer at Uber. Until June 2017, she was a marketing executive at Apple Music after joining the company through its acquisition of Beats Music, where she was the head of global marketing. In 2016, Billboard named her Executive of the Year, and Fortune included her in their 40 Under 40 list. Fast Company has included Bozema on its list of 100 most creative people. Bozema was born in Ghana, and she left the country at 14 with her family to immigrate to Colorado Springs.
What are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life?
I love Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. Her writing style is incredibly poetic and complex. She doesn't allow any laziness in reading her work. So beyond the incredible story, I learned to take my time to absorb the characters and to reread passages when there was so much to unpack. It was also the book I asked my late husband to read when he dropped his pickup line to get to know me better. Our first date was a book review, and clearly he passed with flying colors. 2 months later, he presented me with a painting of his interpretation of the book as a birthday gift. I knew then that I wanted to marry him. Anyone who could take his time to read, comprehend, and interpret Toni Morrison's work, based on my recommendation, was someone I wanted to spend significant time with. That experience taught me that when people care, they'll go beyond the extra mile to understand you. So Toni Morrison helped me set a high bar.
What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love?
I love to people watch. I can literally do that all day long. It's fascinating to watch people go by. There's so much you can learn about a culture by just watching its people walk with each other. Great places to people watch are food courts in American malls, street corner cafes in Paris, the market in Accra. Fashion, etiquette, PDA, all of it can be learned and make the observer a more respectful participant in that culture.
When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do?
I sleep, or rather, I nap. There's no conundrum that a 20-minute nap can't help me unpack. It's like a refresh button for my mind. I wake up clearer and more able to make the gut decision because I've stopped thinking. Whatever I'm feeling when I wake up is the feeling I go forward with.
If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why? Are there any quotes you think of often or live your life by?
Hands down, it would be the change you want to see in the world. We spend far too much time complaining about the way things are and forget that we have the power to change anything and everything. I'd have a secondary quote, too. I'm starting with the man in the mirror, Michael Jackson. Same message, different delivery.
Quotes I'm Pondering. Tim Ferriss, October 9th through October 30th, 2015. An expert is a person who has made all the mistakes that can be made in a very narrow field. Niels Bohr, Danish physicist and Nobel Prize winner. What we usually consider as impossible are simply engineering problems. There's no law of physics preventing them. Michio Kaku, physicist and co-founder of string field theory. These individuals have riches just as we say that we have a fever, when really the fever has us. Seneca, Roman Stoic philosopher, famed playwright. I also have in mind that seemingly wealthy but most terribly impoverished class of all, who have accumulated dross but know not how to use it or get rid of it, and thus have forged their own golden or silver fetters. Henry David Thoreau, American essayist and philosopher, author of Walden. I started out basically imagining I was writing for a stadium full of replicas of myself, which made things easy because I already knew exactly what topics interested them, what writing style they liked, what their sense of humor was, etc. Tim Urban, Twitter, Facebook, @WaitButWhy, waitbutwhy.com. Tim Urban is the author of the blog Wait But Why and has become one of the internet's most popular writers. Tim, according to Fast Company, has captured a level of reader engagement that even the new media giants would be envious of. Today, Wait But Why receives more than 1.5 million unique visitors per month and has over 550,000 email subscribers. Tim has gained a number of prominent readers as well, like authors Sam Harris and Susan Cain, Twitter co-founder Evan Williams, TED curator Chris Anderson, and Brain Pickings Maria Popova. Tim's series of posts after interviewing Elon Musk have been called by Vox's David Roberts the meatiest, most fascinating, most satisfying posts I've read in ages. You can start with the first one. Elon Musk, the world's raddest man. Tim's TED Talk, Inside the Mind of a Master Procrastinator, has received more than 21 million views.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift and why? Or what are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life? The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. Because of the 2 main characters in the book, Howard Rourke and Peter Keating, neither of the characters is like a real person. They're both too one-dimensional and extreme. But to me, if you put them together, you get each of us. Rourke is a totally independent reasoner. He reasons from first principles, the base facts at the core of life, like the limits of physics and the limits of his own biology, and uses that information only as the building blocks of his reasoning to construct his conclusions, his decisions, and his life path. Keating is the opposite. He is a totally dependent reasoner. He looks outward and sees contemporary values, social acceptance, and conventional wisdom as the core facts, and then does his best to win the game within those rules. His values are society's values, and they dictate his goals. We're all like Rourke sometimes and Keating other times. I think the key to life is to figure out when it makes sense to save mental energy and be like Keating. I'm super conforming in my clothing choices because it's not something that's important to me, and when in life it really matters to be like Rourke and reason independently, choosing your career path, picking your life partner, deciding how to raise your kids, etc. The Fountainhead was a major influence when I wrote a long blog post about why I think Elon Musk is so successful. To me, he's like Rourke. He's tremendous at reasoning from first principles. In the post, I call this being a chef, someone who experiments with ingredients and comes up with a new recipe. Musk is unusually chef-like. Most of us spend most of our lives being like Keating, or what I call a cook, someone who follows someone else's recipe. We'd all be happier and more successful if we could learn to be chefs more often, which just takes some self-awareness of the times we're being a cook and an epiphany that it's not actually as scary as it seems to reason independently and act on it. Note from Tim Ferriss. I asked Tim to share a fun piece of related background. Here it is. In early 2015, Elon reached out to schedule a call. He said he had read some Wait But Why posts and was wondering if I might be interested in writing about some of the industries he's involved in. I flew out to California to meet with him, tour the Tesla and SpaceX factories, and spend some time with the executives at both companies to learn the full story about what they were doing and why. Over the next 6 months, I wrote 4 very long posts about Tesla and SpaceX and the history of the industries surrounding them, during which I had regular conversations with Elon in order to really get to the bottom of the questions I had. In the first 3 posts, I tried to answer the question, why is Elon doing what he's doing? In the 4th and final post of the series, I examined Elon himself and tried to answer the question, why is Elon able to do what he's doing? That's what led me to explore all these ideas around reasoning from first principles, being a chef who comes up with a recipe, versus reasoning by analogy, being a cook who follows someone else's recipe. What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life in the last 6 months or in recent memory? The New York Times crossword puzzle app. I've always liked crossword puzzles, but I kind of sucked at them. Since getting the app, I've gotten much better. Started off mostly doing Monday through Wednesday puzzles, and now I do every day of the week. And doing the puzzle is a delightful part of my day every day. I love waking up and working on the day's puzzle in the morning, in bed, while eating breakfast, on the subway, while standing in line at a coffee place, etc. But I have to be careful. The later it gets in the week, the longer the puzzle takes me, and I often don't have the discipline to put down a hard puzzle until I finish it, which can bleed badly into my planned workday and make me hate myself. Or sometimes I'll open the app when I'm taking a 5-minute work break, and then that turns into an 82-minute work break, and I again hate myself, so I now try to keep my puzzling to nighttime. How has a failure, or apparent failure, set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure of yours? My senior year of college, I decided to apply to write the music for an annual student-written musical called The Hasty Pudding. When I went to the orientation for people applying to be the composer, the session was run by the head of the program and a fellow student who worked at the program and who was assisting the head in the audition process. The head talked us through how applying worked, and the student assistant got on the piano to give some examples of what kind of music they'd be looking for. I left super excited about this. I wanted to compose music for a living after college and was dying to get the gig. Later that day, they emailed all of the applicants the schedule for when we'd be coming in to play our sample songs for the program head as our audition. On the schedule, I noticed the names of both the person who had written the music for the show the previous year, and I knew the same composer often wrote the music multiple years in a row, and the student assistant himself, the one who had given us advice about what they were looking for. Totally deflated, I decided not to apply. Clearly, either last year's composer, who already had a relationship with the program head, or the student assistant would end up with the job. A few months later, I saw the show being advertised around campus, and the composer was neither of them. Some other guy got it. I had massive regret and self-loathing for not applying, but a cheap lesson. Don't get daunted out of shooting for something you want, especially by potentially unfounded assumptions. If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say, and why? It would be a magical billboard that would display something unique for each person who looked at it. The billboard would be able to mind read, figuring out which group of people the viewer was most one-dimensionalizing, demonizing, and dehumanizing in their heads. For one viewer today, that might be Trump voters. For another, it might be Muslims. For another, it might be black people or wealthy white people or sex offenders. Whichever the group, the viewer would see an image of a member of that group doing something that reminded the viewer of that type or person's full three-dimensional humanity. Maybe it would be that person sitting by the deathbed of their parent, or helping their child with their homework, or doing some silly hobby that the viewer also happened to like. I think humans can only feel real hatred of people they're able to dehumanize in their heads. As soon as someone is exposed to reality and reminded of the full humanness of someone they hate, the hatred usually fades away and empathy pours in. What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made? My first year out of college, I started a small test prep company, tutoring for SAT, ACT, etc. Over the next 9 years, I put a large portion of my time into growing that company. Early on, my co-founder and I realized it was an advantage to be two single dudes in our 20s with no real financial obligations, so we decided to keep our lifestyles at the same level even as the company grew. After a good year, instead of giving ourselves a $25,000 raise each, we'd keep our salaries in the same place and hire a $50,000 employee. After a great year, we'd keep our salaries where they were and hire 3 or 4 new employees. I can credit my co-founder mostly for this, as he's the more disciplined one of the two of us, but it turned out to be a good strategy. By the time I turned 30, the company had 20 employees and was generating probably 10 times the revenue it would have been generating had we kept upping our salaries each year. We traded the fun of having fancy lifestyles in our 20s for being far more free people at the age of 30. This freedom is what led me to start Wait But Why and become a full-time writer. What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love? I have a toy box at home. Well, I actually just have a lot of toys, but my fiancée finally got fucking sick of my shit being everywhere and brought home a box where she insisted I keep all my toys. The toys are all mechanical, tactile, fidgety things, the same toys I liked when I was 5. I have a bunch of different kinds of magnets, a wide array of silly putties, fidget spinners, fidget cubes, bouncy balls, etc. This isn't just because I'm a child. It actually helps me focus. I'm a kinetic thinker, the kind of person who paces constantly when on a phone call. And when I'm working, brainstorming, researching, outlining, or writing, I do a lot better with a toy in my hand. If I don't have one, I'll end up biting my nails down until they bleed. I have problems. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life? Working as a writer on your own hours, it's tempting to get into the romantic notion that you don't play by society's rules. You work from home in your underwear. You do your most inspired writing at 3 a.m. You never set an alarm, etc. I've always prided myself on doing things unconventionally, and I'm very physically lazy, so I was definitely a believer in the unconventional work schedule environment. The only problem is that it doesn't actually work well for me at all. I'd get stuff done when I had a deadline, but when I didn't, I'd be horribly unproductive. I also found myself in a permanent state of kind of working. I was rarely in a long period of full work focus, and I was rarely just carefree off work. I realized at some point recently that there's something to the go to an office from 9 to 5 thing. I stopped writing from home and started putting clothes on and writing from a coffee shop. I started going to bed at a normal human hour and setting an alarm. And I'd try to compartmentalize, being dead serious about work until the late afternoon or early evening, and then stopping entirely until the next day. I've even tried taking weekends, or at least one weekend day, off work. I'm not perfectly on this schedule and sometimes fall off the wagon, but when I can manage to pull it off, it's better for me for a few reasons. Most people do their best work in the morning, and I'm no exception. Working later in the day kills your social life, since most social life happens between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m. on weekdays and on weekends. If you're working in that time, you suddenly become that friend who's never available, which is horribly short-sighted and unwise. As I detailed in my TED Talk, I think we all have two main characters in our heads: a rational decision-maker, the adult in your head, and an instant gratification monkey, the child in your head who doesn't care about consequences and just wants to maximize the ease and pleasure of the current moment. For me, these two are in a constant battle, and the monkey usually wins. But I've found that if I turn life into a yin-yang situation, e.g., work till 6 today, then no work till tomorrow, it's much easier to control the monkey in the work period. Knowing he has something fun to look forward to later makes him much more likely to cooperate. In my old system, the monkey was in a constant state of rebellion against a system that never really gave him any dedicated time. What advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? What advice should they ignore? You can kind of group all careers into two major buckets: careers where you're the CEO and careers where you work for a CEO. Careers where you're the CEO include anything where you're trying to start your own company, anything where you're trying to make your name in the arts and win fans, anything where you're doing freelance work, paths where you're driving the ship of your own career and making the big decisions. Careers where someone else is the CEO are where you're on an existing ship that's being driven by someone else, and you're doing a job on that ship. This includes obvious situations where you're an employee at a company, but also a situation where the career itself is a predefined ship, like being a doctor or a lawyer. Society loves to glorify the you as CEO paths and make people who don't want to be the CEO of their own career feel inferior about their path. But neither of these paths is inherently better or worse than the other. It just depends on your personality, your goals, and what you want from a lifestyle. There are some super smart, talented, special people whose gifts are best expressed as CEO, and others whose are best expressed when someone else is worrying about keeping the lights on and you can just put your head down and focus on your work. Likewise, There are some people who need to be CEO to find their work fulfilling, and others for whom being CEO and having their work bleed into everything is a recipe for misery. For some people, they want one thing specifically, like someone who needs to be a singer-songwriter to be happy. But most of us leave college pretty torn about the kind of work we want to do most. For those people, I'd recommend thinking hard about the CEO question and experimenting in your 20s to see what it feels like on both sides. What are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise? I'm a writer, and I find that a lot of advice to young writers, especially those trying to make a name for themselves online, centers around trying to win readers over. If you think of your potential readers as pegs, this advice is about trying to mold yourself into the right-shaped hole, a hole that will fit a lot of readers or draw in a bunch of readers quickly or some other means of getting a writing career going. I think the opposite advice is better. Obsess over figuring out the funnest, most exciting, most natural shape of yourself as a writer and start doing that. There are a lot of people on the internet, and they can all access your work with one tap on the phone in their pocket. So even if only 1 in every 1,000 of them, 0.1%, happens to be a reader peg that perfectly matches the shape of your writing hole, that amounts to over 1 million people who will absolutely love what you're doing. I started out basically imagining I was writing for a stadium full of replicas of myself, which made things easy because I already knew exactly what topics interested them, what writing style they liked, what their sense of humor was, etc. I ignored the conventional wisdom that online articles should be short, frequent, posted consistently, because I knew the Tims in that stadium didn't care about those things, and instead focused on a single type of topic. And it worked. 4 years later, many of those people who happen to like my type of writing have found me. By focusing inward on yourself as a writer instead of outward on what you think readers will want to read, you'll end up creating the best and most original work, and that 1 in 1,000 person who happens to love it will end up finding their way to you. In the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to? What new realizations and/or approaches helped? I've learned to make my no list by starting with my yes list. The yes list should be centered around what's important, but how do you define a vague concept like important? I use a couple of simple litmus tests. When it comes to my work yes list, I think about what I might call the epitaph test. When I find myself with an opportunity, I ask myself whether I'd be happy if my epitaph had something to do with this project. If the answer is a clear no, it probably means it's not actually very important to me. Thinking about your epitaph, as morbid as it is a nice way to cut through all the noise and force yourself to look at your work from a super zoomed out perspective where you can see what really matters to you. So I try to make my yes list by thinking about the epitaph test, and potential time commitments outside of that definition fall on my no list. For me, the epitaph test is usually a reminder to focus my time and effort on doing the highest quality and most original creative work I can. For my social life yes list, a similar test could be called the deathbed test. We all hear about these studies where people on their deathbed reflect on what they regret most, and the cliché is that nobody ever says they regret spending more time in the office. That's because a deathbed offers people a level of zoomed-out clarity that's hard to get to in our normal lives. And it's only when we think we're lacking that clarity in the fog of our day-to-day rush that we'd think it makes sense to neglect our most important personal relationships. The deathbed test pushes me to do 2 things. Make sure I'm dedicating my time to the right people with the question, Is this someone I might be thinking about when I'm on my deathbed? Make sure I'm spending enough high-quality time with the people I care about most with the question, if I were on my deathbed today, would I be happy with the amount of time I spent with this person? An alternative is thinking about other people's deathbeds. If X person were on their deathbed today, how would I feel about the amount of quality time I've spent with them? The people who matter most are always in competition for your time with both your work and with other people, and the deathbed test can be a good reminder that the only way to dedicate the proper amount of time to your key people is by saying no to a lot of other stuff and a lot of other people. The point of both the epitaph test and the deathbed test is that by the time you're on your deathbed and your epitaph is being drafted, it's too late to change anything. So we want to do whatever we can to access that magical end-of-life clarity before the end of life actually happens. Of course, actually saying no to your no list is a struggle of its own, and I'm still working on that. But having good mechanisms for defining what's important has helped a lot.
I used to resent obstacles along the path, thinking, if only that hadn't happened, life would be so good. Then I suddenly realized life is the obstacles. There is no underlying path.
Jan 11. Twitter, Instagram, @Jan11, Jan11.com. Jan 11 is the Tow Professor of Physics and Astronomy at Barnard College of Columbia University and has contributed to an understanding of black holes, the cosmology of extra dimensions, and gravitational waves in the shape of space-time. She is also Director of Sciences at Pioneer Works, a cultural center dedicated to experimentation, education, and production across disciplines. Her books include How the Universe Got Its Spots and a novel, A Madman Dreams of Turing Machines, which won the Penn Bingham Prize.
She was recently named a Guggenheim Fellow, a grant awarded to those who have demonstrated exceptional capacity for productive scholarship. Her latest book, Black Hole Blues and Other Songs from Outer Space, is the inside story on the discovery of the century, the sound of space-time ringing from the collision of two black holes over 1 billion years ago.
How has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure of yours?
Failure is highly underrated. There's an anecdote about Einstein I only came across very recently. In 1915, he thought gravitational waves, ripples in the shape of space-time, were the most important consequence of his general theory of relativity. He reversed himself a couple of years later, claiming they did not exist. He goes back and forth like this for a bit. Several years on, he submits a paper for publication asserting they do not exist. Somewhere between acceptance and going to press, he slips in an entirely new manuscript that says they do. A friend warns, Einstein, you have to be careful. Your famous name will be on these papers. Einstein laughs. My name is on plenty of wrong papers, he says. In the 1930s, he declares he does not know if gravitational waves exist, but it is a most important question. In 2015, 100 years after Einstein first proposes their existence, a massive billion-dollar experimental undertaking records gravitational waves from the collision of two black holes over 1 billion years ago, waves emitted long before humans emerged on the Earth. We discourage failure, and by doing so, we subtly discourage success. My favorite personal failure is my first cosmological theory. When I learned the Earth was round, I believed we lived inside the sphere. I was knocked back and simultaneously thrilled to see another possibility come into focus. We live on the sphere. Incredible. Science isn't about being right preemptively or knowing the answer. Science is motivated by the human drive to struggle to discover.
What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made?
I recently renovated about 3,000 square feet in Pioneer Works, a spectacular cultural center for art, music, film, and now science. The facility is housed in a former ironworks factory on the water in Red Hook, Brooklyn. We had no architect for the renovation, no plans, no drawings, no measurements. I stood with the founder, Dustin Yellen, and the director, Gabrielle Florens, mostly yelling and arguing. Someone would declare, "I want a room there. I want all glass. I want no glass. I want walls. I want no walls. A door here." And each of us would occasionally concede to the others while the incredibly talented builder, Willie Vanterpool, listened and integrated our ideas and implemented what emerged as a surprisingly coherent design. As a very theoretically leaning physicist, this was the most physical expression of any creative project I've undertaken, and was one of the riskiest investments I've considered. I'm now here in the new science studios as I write these replies, and I marvel at the outcome. The space is stunning and inviting and inspiring. We're building the world we want to inhabit, and by doing so, we've constructed a remarkable, unusual space for the sciences in an unconventional setting. Science belongs in the bigger world because, as I've gotten into the habit of saying, science is part of culture.
In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
I used to resent obstacles along the path, thinking if only that hadn't happened, life would be so good. Then I suddenly realized life is the obstacles. There is no underlying path. Our role here is to get better at navigating those obstacles. I strive to find calm, measured responses and to see hindrances as a chance to problem solve. Often I fall back into old frustrations, but if I remind myself, this is a chance to step up, I can reframe conflicts as a chance to experiment with solutions.
In the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to?
I am terrible at saying no. Truly terrible. I'll be reading the other responses for advice here. We need a new diversity, not one based on biological characteristics and identity politics, but a diversity of opinion and worldviews.
Ayan Hirsi Ali.
Twitter, @Ion, theahafoundation.org.
Ayan Hirsi Ali is a women's rights activist, champion of free speech, and best-selling author. As a young girl in Somalia, she was subjected to female genital mutilation, FGM. When forced by her father to marry a distant cousin, she fled to Holland and claimed political asylum, working her way up from being a janitor to serving as an elected member of the Dutch Parliament. As a member, she campaigned to raise awareness of violence against women, including honor killings and FGM, practices that had followed her fellow immigrants into Holland. In 2004, Ayan gained international attention following the murder of Theo van Gogh, who had directed her short film Submission, a film about the oppression of women under Islam. The assassin left a death threat for her pinned to Van Gogh's chest. This tragic event is chronicled in her best-selling book, Infidel. She is also the author of The Caged Virgin, Nomad, and most recently, the bestseller Heretic: Why Islam Needs a Reformation Now.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift, and why? Or what are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life?
Karl Popper's The Open Society and Its Enemies, first published in 1945. I'd often give this to my politician friends when I was in politics, and now I give it to students. One of the biggest lessons for me from this book is that so many bad ideas that lead to authoritarian consequences begin with good intentions. This is timeless wisdom. When I was in politics in the Netherlands, I was surrounded by politicians with wonderful intentions. They wanted to do good and involve the government in every aspect of life by expanding programs. Yet these good intentions would lead to controlling more and more of people's lives. One example was childcare. We debated whether the government should provide free childcare. It sounds great and came from good intentions to support parents continuing their careers. But in practice, it would mean the government replaces the spouse or partner. It would require parents to divulge personal information to the state. It would dictate how people's money was spent and how children should be raised. The price of ceding the authority of parents to government was simply too high. That's just one small example, but it illustrates how government loves control. Popper would not have liked that idea.
If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why?
We need a new diversity, not one based on biological characteristics and identity politics.
Real world. What advice should they ignore?
Students should go to college with an open mind. I advise them to ignore all the absolutism around them, both in terms of ideas and people. When they're told that some people or ideas are wrong, hateful, or offensive, a light bulb should go off in their heads. That is the moment their curiosity should be piqued to find out for themselves whether it is indeed a bad thing. Adopting an attitude of critical thinking is most crucial in learning anything. Many students come to me full of wonderful intentions, hoping to change the world. They plan to spend their time helping the poor and disadvantaged. I tell them to first graduate and make a lot of money, and only then figure out how best to help those in need. Too often, students can't meaningfully help the disadvantaged now, even if it makes them feel good for trying to. I have seen so many former students in their late 30s and 40s struggling to make ends meet. They spent their time in college doing good rather than building their careers and futures. I warn students today to be careful how they use their precious time and to think carefully about when is the right time to help. It's a well-worn cliché, but you have to help yourself before you help others. This is too often lost on idealistic students. I am often asked whether one should work in the private or public sector. I always advise working in the private sector, and wish I did this before entering politics and the public sector. The private sector teaches important skills like entrepreneurship that can then be applied to any area of work later on.
Buddhists observe that we're all on fire. It's so beautiful to sometimes tune in and see the flickering. Graham Duncan, EastRockCap.com. Graham Duncan is the co-founder of East Rock Capital, an investment firm that manages $2 billion for a small number of families and their charitable foundations. Before starting East Rock 12 years ago, Graham worked at 2 other investment firms. He started his career by co-founding the independent Wall Street research firm Medley Global Advisors. Graham graduated from Yale with a BA in ethics, politics, and economics. He is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and serves as co-chair of the Sohn Conference Foundation, which funds pediatric cancer research. Josh Waitzkin calls Graham the tip of the spear in the realms of talent tracking and judgment of human potential in high-stakes mental arenas.
What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love? I wear a Subpack M2 wearable physical sound system while I commute on the subway to my office, and sometimes while I work at my desk. The system lets you feel the vibration of music through your body. Music producers, gamers, and deaf people are the primary users. I find the full body experience of music makes listening to music, or even a podcast, more of an immersive somatic experience rather than just a conceptual head thing. If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why? Are there any quotes you think of often or live your life by? I have 2 candidates. First, it's not how well you play the game. It's deciding what game you want to play. Kwame Appiah. This quote separates striving from strategy and reminds me to take a macro view of what I'm doing, like in a video game where you can zoom out and you suddenly see you've been running around in one corner of the maze. It loosens someone's relationship to the game, too, helping to separate having ambition from being ambitious, or accessing hustle without becoming a hustler. Second, The Buddhist novelist George Saunders said in an interview that he has an image of people's nectar in decaying containers. That image haunts me. When I think of it on a given morning, it allows me to see the Buddha nature flowing through all these lovely, flawed, living and slowly dying creatures we encounter every day. My 3-year-old daughter's 3-year-old self is so temporary. Buddhists observe that we're all on fire. It's so beautiful to sometimes tune in and see the flickering. What is the book or books you've given most as a gift, and why? Or what are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life? Sam Barondes's book, Making Sense of People, has had a big impact on my thinking, and I sometimes give a copy to people in the midst of hiring someone or even deciding whether to get engaged. As part of my role as an investor, I interview 400 to 500 people a year to decide whether to hire them or invest in their various startups or investment funds. And the most useful mental model I have found to help understand what makes people tick is the one Barondes describes in his book. The model is called the Big Five, or OCEAN: open-minded, conscientious, extroverted, agreeable, neurotic. The academics who developed the model clumped every English adjective that could be used to describe someone into categories and reduced them to as small a set of factors as they could. The Big Five is considered the equivalent of gravity in the academic literature on personality. There have been thousands of studies using it, and it's considered much more statistically accurate than alternatives such as Myers-Briggs. The killer combination is high open-minded, high conscientious, low neurotic. There are 2 other mental models that greatly influence my thinking about people and teams. The first is Harvard professor Robert Kegan's model of adult development. Kegan argues adults develop and make sense of reality in 5 discrete phases. He lays out his theory in the 1994 book In Over Our Heads. The title is a reference to how the vast majority of adult Americans are at the socialized stage of development. They have difficulty taking other people's perspectives and tend to follow assumptions given to them by society, as opposed to assumptions they freely choose. For people interested in learning more about the model, I recommend Kegan's graduate student Jennifer Garvey Berger's more recent and less academic book, Changing on the Job. The third mental model I find myself recommending lately is found not in a book, but on a slightly obscure website, workwithsource.com. This work is based on a European management consultant who studied hundreds of startups and realized that even when there are multiple co-founders, there is always a single source, the person who took the first risk on a new initiative. That source maintains a unique relationship with the gestalt of the original idea and has an intuitive knowledge of what the right next step for the initiative is, whereas others who join later to help with the execution often lack that intuitive connection to the founder's original insight. Many organizational tensions and power struggles often revolve around a lack of explicit acknowledgement of who the source of the initiative is. A prominent angel investor observed to me recently that many founders seem to hire friends as co-founders more to quell their own anxiety during the early, highly ambiguous days of a new company than to fulfill a specific role. This can work fine as long as everyone is clear on who the source is. The responsibility to fully own the role of source rests in large part with the source themselves. Handing off the source role of an initiative to another person is possible, but extremely difficult, and is most often mishandled. One key to a successful transition is for the original source to actually move on and allow the new leader room to move. One investment manager told me about a study he did of stock performance following founder CEOs departing their businesses. Any subsequent positive stock performance was correlated with the founder completely leaving the board, rather than hanging around to mentor the next CEO. Gates remaining on the Microsoft board during Ballmer's tenure may have contributed to the subsequent lackluster stock performance, whereas Ballmer's recent departure from the board allows Satya Nadella to fully assert his own creative vision. I encounter this dynamic in my work managing the wealth of Forbes 500 families, where second and third generations sometimes struggle with how to relate to the original patriarch and source of their wealth. Often the responsibility to make the room for a real transition is in the hands of the source. It's the lesson from the George Washington song in the Hamilton musical, as Washington declines Hamilton's plea to run for a third term and sings, "We're going to teach them how to say goodbye." What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life in the last 6 months, or in recent memory? I recently bought the Finis swim paddles, under $20, hat tip Ben Greenfield blog. They magically lengthen out my freestyle stroke, and combined with Cressy fins, $29, it feels like I'm flying through water. How has a failure, or apparent failure, set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure of yours? In my role investing in and seeding investment firms, I conduct extensive reference checks on people in order to try to accelerate the process of building trust. In early 2008, I was about to back a firm and conducted a final reference check with the investment manager's former boss, who was quite negative and skeptical of his former analyst. It was enough to make me pause on proceeding with the investment, which then proceeded to work out quite well as the financial crisis unfolded. I had a lot of regret about the size of the profits I missed. Later, it emerged that the reference source may have had an agenda to sabotage his former protege's new firm. 5 years later, I was evaluating another investment manager to partner with, and toward the end of our diligence process, I got a reference that was mixed. By this point, I was better able to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without experiencing cognitive dissonance, the state of negative capability that Keats referred to as useful to writers. This time, the mixed data points only made me do more work, and I gained even more conviction in the character and competence of the investment manager. This investment has been one of our most profitable, and absent my earlier failure, I suspect I would not have had the ability to see the reality of the situation. Today, when I speak with anyone about anything, I try to hold their perspective with a light grip, the knowledge that they, and I, have very incomplete maps of reality. What are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise? I think people overuse the term hedge fund. I think we should throw the term out, perhaps start using H structure instead to capture the concept of incentive compensation. I don't think it's useful to see a fund or a product. These are just temporary collections of flawed, brilliant people who in any given year decide to make a sequel to the movie they made the prior year. The only product is the set of future decisions the portfolio manager makes. If they get divorced or depressed, if their second-in-command leaves, the product completely changes. Calling it a product ignores the reality that the only source of stability is whether the mindset of the team leader is resilient or even anti-fragile, Nassim Taleb's notion of actually getting stronger with volatility. What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made? I invest a disproportionate amount of my income in paying for an ever-growing collection of trainers and coaches. There are two coaches who have had enormous impact on me in the last 5 years. Carolyn Coughlin at Cultivating Leadership and Jim Dethmer at Conscious Leadership. Carolyn is the most gifted listener I have ever encountered. She surfaces my hidden assumptions, the ones that hold me rather than me holding them, and teaches me to ask better and better questions. Jim Dethmer may be one of the few living bodhisattvas. Jim has helped me refine my communication skills and helped me develop more conscious relationships at work and with my family. I picture masterful coaches like Jim and Carolyn playing the same role as the wizards from Lord of the Rings. They exude supportive, loving energy that creates the conditions for life feeling like an adventure from a secure base, an endless unfolding of possibility. In the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to? I have my assistant Google pictures of people I'm considering meeting or calling in the next 2 weeks and put them in Trello cards. I see meeting new people as the opportunity to open a new door to a new world that could change my or their life in some way. Seeing someone's picture allows me to visualize their intentionality and unleashes more creative ideas about what we can discuss and how I may be able to help them. It also lets me access whether I have a full-body yes to actually seeing them and opening this new door, and if I don't, then I take my hand off the door handle. When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do? What questions do you ask yourself? I ask myself, what would be the worst thing about that outcome not going the way I want? I had started using it out loud with my kids, and recently my 8-year-old daughter started asking it back to me. I really like to be punctual. We were late to drop her at school, and I was impatient, so she asked me, "Dad, what exactly would be the worst thing about being late?" It completely shifted my mindset in the moment. I like the question because it often surfaces a hidden assumption. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life? I've begun swimming most mornings, and I find it often shifts my mindset for the rest of the day. Swimmers talk about the concept of water feel, which is getting a grip in the water and pulling your body past that point instead of ripping your hand through the water, which moves you forward but is much less efficient, much less graceful. As David Foster Wallace points out in his speech, "This is water." Much of life is water to us. We are swimming in it and can't see it because we're either in a hurry or not awake to our context. When I stop to really feel the water before I pull, it shifts my way of being from thrashing toward the other end of the pool to a more effortless flow of working with the reality of where I am. What advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? I like to think about careers through Dan Siegel's model of a river flowing between two banks, where one side is chaos and the other side is rigidity. Dan points out that all mental illnesses reside on one bank or the other. Schizophrenia is chaos, OCD is rigidity, and healthy integration is swimming in the middle of the river. Most college students have started life closer to the rigidity bank and over the course of their careers will experiment with swimming toward the middle. I have come to think of the lane next to rigidity as an appropriately conventional one for your 20s that requires the skill of refining reality, a place to swim where it's important to learn the jargon of an industry and apprentice under someone, to develop judgment and discover your zone of genius. I think swimming in the middle lane happens most often in people's 30s or 40s, a stage where you begin crafting your own language for what you do as an increasingly strong poet. You make your craft your own and view your life as more self-expression than simply playing out other people's roles for you. And then, some small percentage of people will paddle over to the lane next to chaos, the place where you find novelists Robert Pirsig and David Foster Wallace, investors like Mike Burry or Eddie Lampert, or entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. I experience them as consistently asserting reality through their powerful storytelling, while always bearing the risk that their egos grow too big and their creative narcissism becomes too well defended. They can lose their feedback loop with reality and flop onto the bank of chaos. Through this lens, Pirsig's wrestling with his sanity toward the end of his life Steve Jobs' magical thinking about his illness, and Eddie Lampert's Ayn Randian framing of his investment in Sears may all have been examples of strong poets losing their feel for where they can mythologize to the point of bending our collective reality, and where they suddenly appear crazy. I think Musk drives hedge fund managers crazy, as half of them are short his shares because he exudes so much promotional hucksterism, and half of them are long because he is actually thinking on a 100-year timescale. It's very confusing. In retrospect, I would tell my 21-year-old self to have a little more patience in swimming along the rigidity bank rather than constantly seeking the entrepreneurial and chaotic side of the river. In one scary moment, I managed to resign only a minute before my boss was going to fire me for working on my own agenda instead of his. But you also don't want to get stuck too close to rigidity and risk living someone else's life instead of your own. Either way, it's critical to remember you can always choose to course correct and swim towards structure or chaos, apprenticeship or freedom, depending on what you need at that moment, what tempo and phase of your career you want to be in, which riverbank you're coming from, and where you want to go. I highly recommend the poem For Julia in the Deep Water by John N. Morris to parents who, like me, are navigating the question of when and whether to let their kids swim away.
Ego is about who's right. Truth is about what's right. Mike Maples, Jr. Twitter, @M2Jr. Floodgate.com. Mike Maples, Jr. is a partner at Floodgate, a venture capital firm that specializes in micro-cap investments in startups. He has been on the Forbes Midas list since 2010 and named one of Fortune magazine's 8 Rising Stars. Before becoming a full-time investor, Mike was involved as a founder and operating executive at back-to-back startup IPOs, including Tivoli Systems, IPO Tivs, acquired by IBM, and Motive, IPO MOTV, acquired by Alcatel-Lucent. Some of Mike's investments include Twitter, Twitch.tv, NGMoco, Weebly, Chegg, Bazaar Voice, Spiceworks, Okta, and Demand Force.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift, and why? Or what are books that have greatly influenced your life? The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie Ware. Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach. Hope for the Flowers by Trina Paulus. Living Forward by Michael Hyatt and Daniel Harkavy. How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton M. Christensen. How has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure of yours? When I was in college, I was rejected by the fraternities that I was interested in, so I ended up helping to start one. The fraternities that said no are no longer on campus, and the one I helped start turned out to be among the absolute best. When I came back to Silicon Valley, I didn't get a general partner offer from the venture firms I cared most about, so I ended up starting one called Floodgate. Floodgate is doing awesome, and I'm thankful every day that I didn't get what I wanted. I love that Bill Campbell's called The Coach, a famous mentor to tech icons like Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, and Larry Page. Favorite song was You Can't Always Get What You Want by the Rolling Stones. There is so much wisdom in that song. Sometimes not getting what you want opens the door to getting what you need. If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say? Integrity is the only path where you will never get lost. What are some of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made? Believing in my kids? Moving to California to be a VC, venture capitalist, when everyone said it was a stupid idea. A dog named Stella, if you can believe it. Learning how to slow down and take pictures with a manual focus lens. a few startup investments that worked out. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life? Understanding that even though great scientists never believe they can state, "This is the truth," they still seek the truth more passionately than all others. What advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? Life will go faster than you know. It will be tempting to live a life that impresses others, but this is the wrong path. The right path is to know that life is short. Every day is a gift, and you have certain gifts. Happiness is about understanding that the gift of life should be honored every day by offering your gifts to the world. Don't let yourself define what matters by the dogma of other people's thoughts, and even more important, don't let the thoughts of self-doubt and chattering self-criticism in your own mind slow you down. You will likely be your own worst critic. Be kind to yourself in your own mind. Let your mind show you the same kindness that you aspire to show others. What are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise? This worked for me in my career, so do it my way. The best advice I have seen comes from people who don't try to tell me the answer. Instead, they give me a new approach to thinking about the question so that I can solve it better on my own. Most bad recommendations I could reduce to, "I have been successful, so do it my way." The best advice is more like, "I can't answer your question, but this might be a good way for you to think about it." Everyone has their own journey. People who offer great advice understand that their goal is to help someone on their unique journey. People who offer bad advice are trying to relive their old glories. In the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to? People who are powerful but are not honest or good. I've realized that accommodating such people is a waste of time. Your time is limited, so it's best to spend it with people who will make you feel like you made the most of your gift of today. When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do? What questions do you ask yourself? I step back and slow down and ask the 5 whys. And when I am done, I also ask if I am afraid of something but too afraid to admit it. We are drawn to the simplicity of jumping to conclusions. We are all ignorant in some way all of the time. So I have come to learn that what we need are methods to counteract our ignorance. The 5 whys is a good way of slowing down and improving decision quality. The most important thing is that it lets me get into a mental space about what is going right or wrong rather than who is right or wrong. Let's take an example. Say we miss the sales target for a quarter. It can often become tempting to figure out whose fault it was. Did sales fail to execute? Do we have a marketing problem? Is the product not differentiated enough? If you are not very, very careful, you can contribute to an environment where people will point fingers at each other and lose their ability to truly learn from the problem. So, instead, I find it helpful to slow down. If I am by myself, I write the 5 whys on paper. If I am in a group, I write the questions down, one at a time, on a whiteboard. Question: why did we miss our $1 million sales target this quarter? Answer: we made fewer sales calls than planned. Question: why did we make fewer sales calls than planned? Answer: we had fewer leads to work this month. Question: why did we have fewer leads this month? Answer: we sent fewer email outreaches than planned. Question: why did we send fewer outreach emails than planned? Answer: we were short-staffed. Question: why were we short-staffed? Answer: we didn't plan around the fact that 2 people were on vacation. In this example, it would be very tempting to answer at the surface level and try to figure out if it's a sales problem, or a marketing problem, or a product problem. But before that happens, I find it is better to be focused on honoring the discovery of the truth rather than determining who is to blame. Going very slow in this exercise is helpful because it can cause people to turn off their lizard brains and fight-or-flight instincts and shift their thinking to their rational brains and problem-solving. In general, whenever I feel things are moving too quickly, I find the right instinct is almost always to slow down and get my thoughts back in order. It ends up speeding things up because we get better decisions and more alignment of everyone on the team. If someone on the team needs to be replaced because they don't have the right skill set, we should face that problem too, but only after we have done our best to seek the truth of the situation. Ego is about who's right. Truth is about what's right.
Quotes I'm Pondering. Tim Ferriss, November 6th through December 4th, 2015. Diversity in counsel, unity in command. Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, known as the King of Persia. I can't give you a surefire formula for success, but I can give you a formula for failure. Try to please everybody all the time. Herbert Bayard Swope, American editor and journalist, first recipient of the Pulitzer Prize. One should use common words to say uncommon things. Arthur Schopenhauer, renowned 19th century German philosopher. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome and Stoic philosopher, author of Meditations. Just one trapeze class made me realize that underneath my mind's chatter, my body has everything under control if I'm willing to take the plunge and fly. Soman Chenani. Twitter, @SomanChenani. Instagram, SomanC. SomanChenani.net. Soman Chenani is a detailed planner, filmmaker, and New York Times best-selling author. Soman's debut fiction series, The School for Good and Evil, has sold more than 1 million copies, has been translated into more than 20 languages across 6 continents, and will soon be a film from Universal Pictures. A graduate of Harvard University and Columbia University's MFA film program, Soman began his career as a screenwriter and director, with his films playing at more than 150 film festivals around the world. He was recently named to the Out 100 and has received the $100,000 Shasha Grant and Sun Valley Writers Fellowship, both for debut writers.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift and why? Or what are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life? The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. I read this slim little book before any new creative project, and it lights a torch fire inside me. The crisis with all creative work is that it requires us to trust that generative voice inside us while also silencing the negative ones. It's so easy to mix them all up and end up quietly abandoning our ambitions. It's why I became a pharmaceutical consultant at 21 years old, selling Viagra instead of writing fantasy like I do now. Half drill sergeant, half Zen voodoo master, Pressfield shot me out of my stupor and taught me the meaning of creative discipline. A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. The greatest work of fiction I've ever read, with the simplest theme. All of us come with baggage and wounds and pain, all of us. but recognizing that common human bond is what helps us transcend that pain. Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. I think the greatest exercise a person can do when they're stuck is to remember what their favorite children's book was. A book that you read over and over and over again. Somewhere in that book is the clue to not only what makes you tick, but also to your life's purpose. Mine was Peter Pan, which featured a title character who was at once charming and also a complete narcissistic pathological demon. It was that ambiguous space between good and evil that I sparked to as a kid, and am now writing stories about as an adult. How has a failure, or apparent failure, set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure of yours? The biggest failure I ever had was with my thesis film at Columbia's Graduate Film School, a movie I'd poured all of my savings into, nearly $25,000, and worked on for 8 months. A day before my final showing to the faculty, I previewed it to a professor who recommended I slash it to pieces and completely recut it. Panicked, I followed his advice and presented the hacked-up version to the faculty the next day, who absolutely despised it. All credibility I'd earned among my professors over the past 3 years went up in smoke. A few weeks later, I ran into one of these disappointed faculty members, one who'd been a huge supporter of my work before this and now could barely look at me. I told him the story of the last-minute recutting. He asked to see the original version. When I showed it to him, his eyes lit up. "Ah, now I see you." It was the most valuable lesson I ever received. Don't let someone knock you off course before you reach your destination. Trust the work. Always trust the work. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life? There's this dazzling short story by Ted Chiang called Liking What You See that did a number on me. The story asserts that beauty has become a modern-day superdrug, that with filtered and face-tuned social media, retouched models on advertisements, and rampant pornography, we've overloaded the senses so that our natural instincts can no longer recognize or react to real beauty anymore. And it's making us confused and miserable, both in how we judge ourselves and how we judge others. That crystal clear warning, beauty is literally ruining our lives, has improved my life tenfold just by making me consciously aware of it, and by making me ignore 90% of what's on Instagram. If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why? If I'm in Hollywood, it would say, "They're lying." If I'm anywhere else, it would say, "If you can conceive of it, it's probably wrong." Meditation has taught me that most of the ideas, opinions, rules, and fixed systems I have in my mind aren't the real truth. They're the residue of past experiences that I haven't let go of. What I've learned is that my soul doesn't speak in thoughts at all. It speaks in feelings, images, and clues. What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life in the last 6 months, or in recent memory? Mother Dirt. It cured my acne and skin problems permanently. It's a $49 spray with oxidizing bacteria that you use in place of soap, and it restores your skin to its natural balance. If I could buy this for every teenager in America, I would. What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love? I don't think I've ever told anyone this, but I read old issues of Archie comics before I go to bed. It's not a new habit. I used to read Archie as a kid before I tucked in for the night. Riverdale in the comics always seemed so crisp and bright and welcoming, the opposite of the way I felt about my school growing up. It continues to give me a warm, soothing feeling before I drift off to sleep. But more important, Closing the day by reading the same thing that I did when I was young gives my life a semblance of beautiful sense and order. What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made? Flying trapeze lessons. It's like shock therapy for the soul. Once you're 50 feet high, soaring on a trapeze, it's just you, your fear, and your instincts. It's the most intimate experience I've had with myself. Just one class made me realize that underneath my mind's chatter, my body has everything under control if I'm willing to take the plunge and fly. What advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? What advice should they ignore? Advice I'd give: make sure you have something every day you're looking forward to. Maybe it's your job, maybe it's a basketball game after work, or a voice lesson, or your writing group, maybe it's a date. But have something every day that lights you up. It'll keep your soul hungry to create more of these moments. Advice to ignore: a little part of me dies every time someone tells me they've taken a job as a stepping stone to something else, when they clearly aren't invested in it. You have one life to live. Time is valuable. If you're using stepping stones, you're also likely relying on someone else's path or definition of success. Make your own. What are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise? Too often, aspiring artists put pressure on themselves to make their creative work their only source of income. In my experience, it's a road to misery. If art is your sole source of income, then there's unrelenting pressure on that art, and mercenary pressure is the enemy of the creative elves inside you trying to get the work done. Having another stream of income drains the pressure on your creative engine. If nothing comes of your art, you still have an ironclad plan to support yourself. As a result, your creative soul feels lighter and free to do its best work. I am a personal practitioner of this. Even after 3 books and a hefty movie deal, I still tutor kids and help them with their college applications. My friends can't understand it, but it's the only way I know how to write without feeling like it's a matter of life and death. In the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to? I'm convinced that the reason Hollywood movies are often so terrible is because everyone is working on 1,000 projects at once. No one is giving anything their full focus. Working on The School for Good and Evil has taught me to be patient. When I'm writing the book, that's all I'm working on, and I say no to everything else, no matter how lucrative. Do I miss opportunities? Sure. But it means that when the books hit shelves, I know that I've left everything on the page and that they're the absolute best I could have done, which gives them the greatest chance to survive through time. And inevitably, because I'm committing to maximum quality, better opportunities arise to replace the ones I've passed up. When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do? Feeling overwhelmed usually means one of 2 things. Either my blood's trapped in my head and I need to go exercise, or more likely, I've overcommitted myself and my brain knows there's no way I can reasonably get done everything I've set out to do. Usually, the solution is to take a deep breath, look at the calendar, and start canceling things or moving deadlines until the paralysis evaporates. Feeling unfocused, on the other hand, usually means I haven't quite locked into whatever I'm working on yet, that a part of me still thinks I can pull the ripcord and bail. It usually happens in the first 3 months of writing a new book. In the end, a lack of focus is usually just fear. Fear that whatever project I'm attempting will go nowhere or fail miserably. Early on, I used to give in to that fear. 4 books later, I know it's just a ghost, and I can blow right through it without looking back.
You can be a juicy, ripe peach, and there'll still be someone who doesn't like peaches.
Dita Von Teese. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. At Dita Von Teese. Dita.net. Dita Von Teese is the biggest name in burlesque in the world since Gypsy Rose Lee, born 1911. Dita is credited with bringing the art form back into the spotlight. She is renowned for her iconic martini glass act and dazzling haute couture striptease costumes adorned with hundreds of thousands of Swarovski crystals. This burlesque superheroine, Vanity Fair, is the performer of choice at high-profile events for designers such as Marc Jacobs, Christian Louboutin, Louis Vuitton, Chopard, and Cartier. She is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Your Beauty Mark, the ultimate guide to eccentric glamour, and has a namesake lingerie collection available internationally at prominent retailers.
If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why?
You can be a juicy ripe peach, and there'll still be someone who doesn't like peaches. This is a quote that my friend's great-grandmother told to her, and she told it to me, and I've always loved it. In the public eye as a burlesque star, I've been called both brilliant and stupid, ugly and beautiful in equal measures. I've strived to let insults fall off me like water off a swan's back. Personally, I find that most things that are universally accepted are mediocre and boring.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift, and why? Or what are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life?
Mae West's On Sex, Health, and ESP is a very rare book, but whenever I find a copy, I buy it to give as a gift. Mae was an incredibly witty woman. She wrote every line she ever said in any film and was responsible for countless memorable quips. She made her first film at age 40 and was the biggest sex symbol of her time. When I was living in Paris, my friends and I would sit around, drink champagne, and read aloud from this hilarious book. I often give It's Called a Breakup Because It's Broken by Greg Behrendt and Amira Ratola Behrendt to friends going through a tough breakup. It's a humorous, clever book with great advice on how to maintain one's dignity during a split. I obviously give a lot of people my own book, Your Beauty Mark. Yes, it's my book, but one reason I love to gift it is for the insightful profiles on eccentric people who go against mainstream standards of beauty. They share their inspiring stories about how they made their beauty marks on the world.
How has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite failure of yours?
For as long as I can remember, I wanted to be a ballet dancer. When I was a little girl, I had this 1950s-era vinyl record, and on it there was a photograph of a ballerina with dramatic winged eyeliner, red lipstick, and she was wearing a pale blue tutu, flesh-toned fishnet tights, and blue satin point shoes. I wanted to be her. I took ballet classes all my life, even cleaning the studio bathrooms in exchange for lessons. By the time I was a teenager, I realized I was never going to be a good enough dancer to be a professional ballerina, no matter how badly I wanted it or how much I practiced. My ballet teachers thought I had great presence, elegance of carriage, nice feet, and I was strong and point. But I just couldn't remember choreography, and I couldn't jump or perform turns in certain directions. When I was 19, I started wearing that 1950s-style winged eyeliner and red lipstick and dressing in vintage style. It wasn't long after that I began creating vintage-style burlesque shows. A few years ago, someone asked me if there was a dream that I knew I would never realize, and I mentioned my childhood dreams of being a ballerina. I suddenly realized that, in a way, I had been given everything that I really wanted. I wanted to be that woman on the album cover. Truthfully, I never really loved dancing, per se. I loved what ballet stood for. I loved the glamour, the femininity, the elegance, the drama, not to mention the sparkling costumes and pink spotlights. Showbiz. That's what I wanted. If I hadn't been a lousy ballet dancer, I doubt I would have pursued the obscure idea of being a 1940s-style burlesque dancer. I believe that sometimes our shortcomings can lead to greatness, because those of us who have intense desire but lack natural God-given talent sometimes find roundabout ways of realizing dreams. I never expected to become famous for doing my little feather fan dances and for bathing in a giant champagne glass. But I strongly feel that with integrity and a real love for showbiz and burlesque, I've made my mark in a more significant way than I might have had I just been a good ballet dancer.
What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life in the last 6 months or in recent memory?
MyLola.com has changed my life. Conscientious 100% organic cotton feminine products that you can curate according to your needs, delivered to your door every month in elegant packaging. They also donate products to low-income and homeless women and girls across the U.S. This company and their approach has been life-changing for me and for every woman I know who has started using their products.
What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made?
Collecting vintage has been a good investment. I originally started wearing vintage clothes in the 90s because I couldn't afford designer things, and now, as dressing vintage style has become all the rage, my collection has become quite valuable. I like to spend money on things that bring me pleasure but that are also easily resold, whether it be artwork, vintage clothing, or antique furniture. I've always been able to trade up, break even, or turn a profit on the antiques I collect. My vintage cars have greatly appreciated in value, and although I do need a modern daily driver, I control my car lust and only buy a modern car when I really need to, every 10 or 15 years or so. I also bought several famous 1940s and 50s era original pinup paintings a while back that have become more valuable, along with vintage Hollywood and pinup memorabilia from silver screen, burlesque, and pinup icons of the past. I love being the caretaker for these relics, and I know that as time goes by, they will keep their mystique and their value. Also, I was on a plane with Richard Branson once, and he had this very weathered Louis Vuitton duffel bag that he said he'd used for more than 30 years. I travel a lot, and after years of funneling money into cheap luggage, I saved up for a Louis Vuitton carry-on, and it's going strong 17 years later. Generally speaking, I don't shop for status bags, but some things are worth the splurge if you can swing it.
What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love?
I'm a natural blonde, but I've been dyeing my hair black and wearing my signature red lipstick and cat eyeliner for over 2 decades. Every Halloween, I go natural, with beige light makeup and a light-colored wig, all worn with a jeans look of some kind. I'm so unrecognizable that it's hilarious to everyone who knows me, and it's a real psychological experiment. I begin to notice how overlooked I become, how vulnerable I feel, and how I'm approached by the kind of men who would never dare try to pick me up. It's my favorite Halloween costume. People think I'm the annoying girl who didn't bother dressing up for the party.
In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
I've become more involved in my business, looking over all my financials. I remember the 1950s sex symbol Mamie Van Doren telling me, "I know it's not fun, but you have to look at all your financials because people will try to fleece you." I'd love to just do the artistic part of my work, and she's right. It isn't fun to look at the numbers, but now that I know everything about the financials of producing my show tours and my deals, I can engage in the business conversations in an educated way.
What would you do if you weren't afraid? Jesse Williams. Twitter, Instagram, @IJesseWilliams. JesseHimself.tumblr.com. Jesse Williams is an activist, actor, entrepreneur, and former high school teacher. He plays Dr. Jackson Avery on ABC's hit series Grey's Anatomy and has appeared in films such as The Butler, The Cabin in the Woods, and Band-Aid. He is the co-founder of the Abroji Company and Abroji mobile app, a popular cultural language and GIF keyboard. He's also a partner and board member of Scholly, a mobile app that has directly connected students to more than $70 million in unclaimed scholarships. He executive produced the documentary Stay Woke, the Black Lives Matter Movement. Jesse co-hosts the sports and culture-themed podcast Open Run on LeBron James's and Maverick Carter's Uninterrupted Network. He is founder of the production company Farword Inc. and the executive producer of Question Bridge, Black Males, a series of transmedia art installations. Jesse gained international attention for his 2016 BET Humanitarian Award acceptance speech.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift and why? Or what are 3 books that have greatly influenced your life? Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. This text helped rid me of the nagging incompleteness in my understood connection between the successes and failings of ancient and modern civilizations. Power needs tools and circumstance. Neither need be earned. A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. At the time in my life that I cracked this book open, it brought me tremendous, dare I say, glee. It was fucking funny, vivid, and adventurous. Sometimes that's what we need. Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. The characters' dilemmas just rocked my world in high school. I bought a second copy, just in case, and I was so grateful for the classroom discussions throughout the rich, layered poetic journey. The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. A seminal work in American and African American literature. Du Bois, a brilliant writer and sociologist, introduced notions like double consciousness and the veil of race, while examining what it means to spend lifetimes primarily viewing ourselves through the eyes of other people, power, and cultures. The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. The protagonist's audacious self-confidence and refusal to compromise his artistic vision, which was to say himself, was a fascinating thing to survey. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life? Transcendental meditation is something I'd long heard about but only stepped into this year, and it's transformed my ability to center my mind and recharge in short periods of time. The David Lynch Foundation has made it so digestible without any of the rigidity or easier said than done elements that I expect many of us find intimidating about beginning a meditation practice. Going to therapy has opened a portal into the how and why of my own thoughts and behaviors. I can see and act with a new level of honesty, which helps cut a path to clearer communication with myself and others. For me, these are among the more critical tools to personal freedom. My therapist operates from a psychodynamic, psychoanalytic orientation. He utilizes a psychoanalytic approach in his clinical conceptualizations and considers his approach to be a little eccentric, less homework and more getting to the root of the issue and, over time, reprocessing for a more authentic self approach to one's life. When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do? What questions do you ask yourself? I tend to lose focus for one of 2 reasons: exhaustion or distraction, or both. Sometimes I look to the cold for remedy, a walk in the crisp air, a cold drink, a shower. The shower doesn't have to be cold. This ceremony itself is kind of a reset button. If it's exhaustion, I'll just take a nap, or more recently, meditate. If the problem isn't exhaustion, I might just pick up whatever novel I'm reading and go off on that journey. Reading creative writing stimulates my creative thoughts. I get big ideas. I'm reminded of something I meant to act on, an incomplete task or story idea of my own. My friend Adipero likes to ask, "What would you do if you weren't afraid?" That's a good one.
We can't control the fact that bad things are going to happen, but it's how we react to them that really matters. Dustin Moskovitz, Twitter, @Moskov, Asana.com. Dustin Moskovitz is the co-founder of Asana, which helps you track your team's work and manage projects. Prior to Asana, Dustin co-founded Facebook and was a key player within the technical staff, first in the position of CTO, and then later as VP of Engineering. He is also the co-founder of Good Ventures, a philanthropic foundation whose mission is to help humanity thrive.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift and why? Or What are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life? The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership by Jim Dethmer and Diana Chapman. Though most people will typically blame other people or circumstances in their life when they are unhappy, Buddhists believe that we are the cause of our own suffering. We can't control the fact that bad things are going to happen, but it's how we react to them that really matters. And that we can learn to control. Even if you don't accept that this is true in all cases, giving it consideration in moments of unhappiness or anxiety will often give you a new perspective and allow you to relax your grip on a negative story. This book is an approachable manual for how to do that tactically, and the lessons it teaches have transformed the way I engage with difficult situations and thus reduce the suffering I experience in big and small ways. Though it is written with leaders in mind, I find myself recommending it to everyone, and we give it to every new employee at Asana. What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life in the last 6 months, or in recent memory? The Back Buddy by the Body Back Company is my favorite purchase from the past 5 years, bar none. Most basically, it allows you to administer self-massage anywhere on your back with the full leverage of 2 hands. But I've also really gotten to know and appreciate all the little knobs and other features over the years. I've even learned how to manipulate parts of my skeletal structure, i.e. self-chiropractic, and incorporate it into my yoga practice. It only costs $30, so I have purchased several, one for the living room, one for my desk at the office, and a collapsible version for traveling, though I do bring the full-size one if I'm checking a roller bag. With 4,500 reviews and a 4.5-star average review on Amazon, I'm far from alone in my appreciation of this product. In the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to? The first no is by far the easiest and cleanest. Declining a request is uncomfortable, so it's tempting to equivocate. Say, you'll hear someone out before deciding, or agree to a smaller version of the request, even when you're confident that you would rather not engage at all. As soon as you open that door, however, you've almost always ensured at least one more request that you'll have to accept or decline in the future, and thus haven't saved yourself the discomfort at all. Worse still, you've crossed a psychological boundary by establishing yourself to the asker as someone who is interested in the type of request being made. Research shows we're remarkably committed to maintaining a consistent sense of external identity, even if we only established it to begin with out of politeness. The asker will see this as an opportunity to press harder or ask you about similar requests that come up in the future, and you'll have even more discomfort declining those requests versus if you had simply declined the first one. They may even start handing out your contact information to other people in their network, multiplying the problem.
You have to lift off the back foot while taking a step forward, or you will not be able to move ahead.
Richa Chadha. Twitter, @Richa Chadha. Instagram, @The Richa Chadha. Richa Chadha is an award-winning Indian actress who works in Hindi films. She made her debut in the comedy Oi Lucky, Lucky Oi, and her major breakthrough was a supporting role in the film noir gangster saga, Gangs of Wasseypur. Richa's role as the bellicose and extremely foul-tongued wife of a gangster earned her a Filmfare Award, India's equivalent of an Oscar. In 2015, Richa made her debut in a leading role with the drama Masan, which received a standing ovation when screened at the Cannes Film Festival.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift, and why? Or what are books that have greatly influenced your life?
The book I give out the most is Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. It reminds me that human beings are the only species that have become conditioned to doubt survival. Plants grow, trusting nature to provide nutrition. Animals thrive in the wild despite dangerous conditions. This book reminded me to have faith at a low point in my life, hence I share it as widely as possible to pull others out of their misery. I was greatly influenced by Alice's Adventures in Wonderland in my formative years. I still live my life wide-eyed in childlike wonder. Even though it was heavy for me at 15, I was greatly impacted by Salman Rushdie's Shame. It made me kinder. Naomi Klein's No Logo made me reassess consumerism and greed.
What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life in the last 6 months, or in recent memory?
In my case, it would be buying a pro subscription to my ice disaster. It didn't fare well for me. My colleagues began to assume that I was up for smaller, inconsequential parts out of desperation, which was far from the truth. It set me back a couple of years. Even though this kind of blatant corruption is not new to the Hindi film industry, I was shocked and depressed. When the reviews came out, they lauded my work, and I saw it as a blessing in disguise. If a single scene could have this impact, what can an entire film do? A year later, I am on a roll. I was top billed cast for India's first original series, Inside Edge, and I have regained credibility with a slate of releases from India and around the world. I think I needed this shock. Trusting blindly in my business, or any business for that matter, is never a good idea. Most people are driven by self-interest or profit, and we can't judge them for it. What we can be is provocable, so people know we won't be sitting ducks if they mess with us.
If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why?
Be so good that they can't ignore you, is the motto I live by. I start afresh with each project. I forget who I am in my past laurels. It keeps me grounded and it makes me work harder. There is a lot of nepotism in my industry. If you were to Google who the top stars are, undoubtedly most stars, particularly the male actors, would have been born into the movie business. It takes time, but if you are consistently good at what you do, at least you get to call your success your own.
What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made?
My father encouraged me to take a course called Money and You, devised around the ideas of Buckminster Fuller. I attended the 4-day course in Kuala Lumpur. The first 2 days focused on money, and the next 2 on you. It was very balanced, taught me to look at money differently, and imbued me with a sense of enterprise at a young age. It cost me $500.
What is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love?
I use a different perfume for every film. Of the 5 senses, I figured the only sense I could play with was the sense of smell. I select the perfume based on the world and milieu of the film and the attributes of the character. I played the character of a village woman in a film called Gangs of Wasseypur. For that, I used Elizabeth Arden's Green Tea Lotus Parfum. I played a gangster in a film called Fokri, in which I wore Provocative Woman from Elizabeth Arden. For my Amazon series Inside Edge, I used Chanel No. 5 because I play a movie star in it. This is a quirk I enjoy because I love to smell good. I am not a method actor, but this allows me to slip into my character with ease. When I walk out of my trailer, the assistants know that it's me walking in character toward the set. Cheap thrills, I guess.
In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
I find that I tend to look at the larger picture. Cinema as a business model in Hindi-speaking India is suffering. There aren't enough screens to accommodate the output, taxation is at a debilitating 51% for entertainment, and the turnover of piracy is 3 times that of other films. All this while digital penetration is growing at an unprecedented rate. When I chose to work on a digital series, many people thought it to be a demotion. They were wrong. Looking at the larger picture gives you perspective. Like when a plane takes off, you realize how small your little cocoon of problems, in fact, is.
What advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? What advice should they ignore?
The education system, by and large, gears everyone up to adhere to set industry standards. While this is a foolproof way to get a job and live a normal life, very few people can break out of the cycle of the mundane to be adventurous, inventive, and selfless. The safety net of a regular job is too comfortable. When I declared to my middle-class Indian academic parents that I intended to not make use of my degree in journalism and instead move to Mumbai to become an actor, they were apprehensive but supportive. My mother told me, you have to lift off the back foot while taking a step forward, or you will not be able to move ahead.
What are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise?
I have been blessed with well-wishers and advisors throughout my career. They teach me what not to do. People make recommendations based on what they think is safest for you, or based on their understanding of who you are and what you ought to be. They set invisible limits on how much you can achieve in your life and pass those limitations on to you inadvertently. I was told to not do independent films, the films I owe my career to dress like others, making me a fashion-friendly, homogenized clone with no identity. Date or marry rich, again, safety net, and not be vocal about political issues. No matter where you are, you have to pay a price for voicing your concerns, and that's a price I was willing to pay. This stuff is simple. It may not always be easy.
In the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to?
I have become better at saying no to things and people, including friends and family, that drain my energy. This isn't easy, especially if you are a people pleaser. When I am straightforward and sincere about my needs, I find that no one is offended when I say no. Those who are offended perhaps don't value my needs.
When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do?
I have a few approaches. First, I journal. It gives me clarity. I have had a diary ever since I was about 10. Today, when I look back at my scribbles from when I was in high school, it gives me great joy to notice how far I have come intellectually and career-wise. I am living my dream. I used to journal frequently as a student growing up. My diary looked like a scrapbook with illustrations and quotes that inspired me. I journal at least thrice a week now, and the time dedicated to it is proportional to my state of mind. If I am contemplative or confused, it tends to be a long session. I maintain one diary that has everything: my to-do list, which I divide into personal and professional; contemplations, how I felt about an incident that perhaps triggered me to journal; and sometimes just plain gratitude. I always buy interesting journals and colorful pens. Right now, I am using a Wonder Woman journal and neon pens. People may think it's childish, but the different colors help me retain more and keep it fun. I meditate. This is a challenge when I feel like my head is in turmoil. I generally start by focusing on my breath. I could count back from 10 to 1 while exhaling, and I drift into meditation. It takes about 20-odd minutes to become somewhat thoughtless. Sometimes I feel like I am asleep, but I realize that lucidity is meditation. It always helps. There has not been a single time in my life when I have meditated on something and it hasn't been useful. I meditate either first thing in the morning or post-lunch if I am at a stressful film shoot. I talk to my father. He is my friend and mentor, and being a life coach and behavioral psychologist, he keeps me grounded and on track. I take a break. I de-tick my cat, take long baths, go on a trek, spend time in nature, read, eat yummy food, and do a life-career detox. This time off usually gifts me with several epiphanies. Always works. A life detox is me delegating my responsibilities to an assistant or manager for a while and seeking help before I turn my phone off and wander and think and relax. A career detox means I turn my phone off, don't read about how films, shows, plays are faring, and be a regular person. I also do a so what exercise. I make a statement and ask myself, so what, at the end of it. For instance, X was rude. So what? I felt disrespected. So what? I don't like being disrespected. So what? What if everyone stops respecting me? So what? I will be alone and loathed. So what? I don't want to be alone. So what? I have an irrational fear of loneliness. So what? It's irrational. So what? So nothing. I'm good. So what? So nothing.
Quotes I'm Pondering. Tim Ferriss, December 11th, 2015 through January 1st, 2016. Grudges are for those who insist that they are owed something. Forgiveness, however, is for those who are substantial enough to move on. Chris Jami, American poet and author of Salome, In Every Inch, in Every Mile. One does not accumulate, but eliminate. It is not daily increase, but daily decrease. The height of cultivation always runs to simplicity. Bruce Lee, martial artist, actor, and author of Tao of Jeet Kune Do. It is vain to do with more what can be done with less. William of Ockham, English philosopher and originator of Occam's razor. Learning to ignore things is one of the great paths to inner peace. Robert J. Sawyer, Hugo and Nebula Award-winning science fiction writer. Whenever there is any doubt, there is no doubt. David Mamet, Ronin. Max Levchin, Twitter, @mlevchin. Affirm.com. Max Levchin is the co-founder and CEO of Affirm, which uses modern technology to reimagine and rebuild core components of financial infrastructure from the ground up. Previously, Max co-founded and was first chief technology officer of PayPal, acquired by eBay for $1.5 billion. He then helped start Yelp as its first investor and served as chairman for 11 years. Max also founded and was CEO of Slide, which Google acquired for $182 million. MIT Technology Review named him Innovator of the Year in 2002 when he was 26 years old.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift and why? Or what are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life? The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov, translated by Pevere et al., which is, I think, one of the finest works of fiction of the last century. It's a fairly short novel, remarkable in its exceptional depth, exploring everything from fundamentals of Christian philosophy to the fantastical and hilarious satire of soul-corrupting 20th century Soviet socialism. I usually buy M&M